clinic, I put a lot of people on vitamin D, and clinically, I don't see huge changes. But I've put 300 people on B1 in the last year and a half. Clinically, I've seen the best changes I've ever seen in my career.
But you were saying, yeah, these just throw them in the garbage, or give them to your worst enemy.
Yeah,
that's what I remember you saying.
That was one of my first 3 videos ever made.
I'm a defender of inflammation. Inflammation is crucial.
It's part of the healing process. It's step 1 in the healing process.
Exactly. We would die without inflammation.
Right.
Thank goodness for inflammation.
We have to get through step 1 to step 2, 3, and 4 to finish the healing cycle.
Exactly.
But if somebody's stuck in step 1, that's a problem with inflammation. Instead of squashing inflammation, you want to heal the body and get them through to step 2. When I learned about lactic acidosis in 2016, I was like, this is the crux of all chronic disease. This is the basis, the foundation. This makes everything makes sense.
Tell me who you are and what you do.
My name is Dr. Darren Schmidt. I've been focused on nutrition in my clinic. I'm actually a chiropractor, but in chiropractic school, I decided to just focus on nutrition. So I started in my practice in 1997, and I got into nutrition hardcore in 98. And I started low carb eating in 1999. And then in 2015, I started keto. 2018, I started a carnivore diet. And so that's been my journey with diet and food. In the meantime, I've not taken any insurance in the last 20 years. I've not taken any new chiropractic patients in the last 15 years. It's all nutrition. And my tools are diet and supplements. So no ozone, no hormones, no peptides, no knives, no surgery, no medications, over-the-counter medications, prescription, no needles in any form, just diet and supplements. So that's been my career.
So let's take it all the way back.
Yeah.
You had some health challenges fairly early on that kind of may have moved your needle as to where it is that you'd like to, where you ended up. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. So when I started undergrad, I did not have any health problems, and I started chiropractic school. I didn't necessarily have any health problems. I just wanted to be a doctor. So in undergrad, I had this idea, maybe I should be a medical doctor. And I didn't know of any medical doctors. So my family is either farmers or teachers. And so I was at Ohio State, and I decided before I take the MCAT entrance exam, why don't I ask a bunch of people what they think about their career? So I interviewed 12 students and doctors of medicine, and nobody encouraged me to go into medicine. It was, kind of a flat response from them. And I'm like, okay, sounds like I'm not going to do that. So I looked at veterinary, optometry, and then spent some time with a chiropractor. And I thought, well, I could do chiropractic. And here's why. He taught me that you can have a problem in the back causing pain down the leg. So if you treat the leg, that's, not the way to go about this. You have to treat the problem in the back. I was like, well, that's pretty holistic. I can do that. Plus it was manual labor. And I spent 17 summers working on a family farm. So I'm used to manual labor. I started working on the farm when I was 9. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because in 1991, I had a drop of parathion fall on my back. So parathion is a terrible insecticide, and it was diluted. I walked underneath the corn sprayer, right? Don't ever walk under a corn sprayer for any reason. I did, and one drop fell on my back, and they told the guy I was working with, I was like, oh my God, it fell on my back. He goes, well, wash your back, wash your shirt, because we had some fresh water. So I did, and he goes, okay, you should be okay. So then my job was to transport, there was a 2-ton water container on the back of on a wagon, and I drove the tractor and the water wagon to the next field. That was my job. So I got to the next field, and then I fell asleep, which never ever happened. In the middle of the day, why would I be falling asleep? It was because of the parathion.
Wow.
And then when he arrived, I woke up and I felt high. Now I've never done drugs, but I know what it feels like to be high because I was high from that parathion. Now, having said that, we had a neighbor, he died from a drop of parathion falling on his boot. Now, it was not diluted with water, right? when you dilute it, it's 5 parts parathion to 200 parts water. So when it fell on his boot, it was completely concentrated, right? And he died that night. So that was 1991. So I started chiropractic school in 94, graduated in 97. I never took any breaks. I just went straight through. And then when I got into nutrition, started going to seminars, I had one of my mentors, we do muscle testing, biofeedback, and he found agricultural chemicals in my body. So he put me on some supplements. This is 2005, I think. Yeah, 2005. And within 2-3 months of taking that supplement, I quadrupled my push-ups and doubled my pull-ups. So my body was I had better endurance, right? Muscular endurance. And he explained to me, yeah, because your body doesn't need to go into parasympathetic mode all the time. It was toxic and it was trying to clean out this toxin, but it couldn't, so like parasympathetic mode is, okay, lay down. Why are you exercising? Why are you doing anything physical? Go lay down. I need to clean myself out, right? Like the body's trying to do that. So when I got this toxin out that summer of 2005, my physical endurance and performance at the gym got so much better. So that was my main health problem at the time. Now, since then...
Can I ask how old were you at that time?
30 something.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I'm 53 now. So having said that, in 2016, I had another exposure. I call them unfriendly exposures. That was black mold. And then in 2020, and like deadly, right? Like terrible heart pain, high blood pressure, couldn't breathe. I'm laying in bed at 2 a.m. I can't breathe. I got terrible thoughts. And it's like, why am I thinking this way? It's from the mold. I got 4 EKGs that year. I went to the cardiologist.
You're going to the emergency room.
That was last year. That was from the gas leak.
Oh,
so 2024, the year of the gas leak. I didn't know I had a gas leak. I think it was actually leaking gas for definitely more than a year, probably 2 years. But I had my gas meter outside my living room window had been leaking, and the way that the wind blows west to east, it would blow into the living room, kitchen, down the hallway, into the bedrooms. And I couldn't smell it. Nobody at my house ever smelled any gas. So these are 3 unlucky exposures or unfriendly exposures: the parathion, the black mold, and the gas leak. And so with the gas leak, May 18th of 2024, I went to the ER at Chelsea Hospital, Chelsea, Michigan. And I couldn't breathe. And my chest pain was 8 out of 10, like a crushing chest pain. I was like, this is it. I'm going to die. I don't know why. All my lipids are normal, which is so frustrating. Blood pressure always normal, but now it's like 140 over 90. It's like, and I can't breathe. Left arm numb, left leg numb. I thought I was having strokes like March, April, May. Like April 15th, right? That's tax day, the worst day of the year. I don't care what anybody says. April 15th is the worst day of the year. That day, I had a meeting with my accountant for like 2-3 hours. I come home. It's like 4 o'clock or something. And it's like, why do I feel so bad? So I lay down in bed. I'm like, something's happening right now. Like I thought I was having a stroke right then and there. So I get up out of bed. I'm like, what do I got to do? And I started taking a supplement for the heart. And the normal dose is 3 a day. And I took 30. And it saved my life.
What was the supplement?
The name of the supplement is called Cataplex B Core from Standard Process. And it's 1 milligram of B1 and adrenal support and heart support. And I took a lot of it. And literally now, and my staff saw me that day and I was white as a ghost. My body temperature, I took my temperature at home. It was like 2 degrees below normal. It was 97 or whatever. 96, whatever. And I just felt like shallow, right? So I chewed these pills and the pink came back and I went back to the office and took my pulse and it was normal again, and the staff saw the difference, right? Anyways, this whole point, I didn't know I had a gas leak going on. So that was April 15th. So then May 18th, I go to the ER and this is a super interesting story. And it's funny now because I can talk about it because I survived, but here's what happened.
So wait, we're in 2023 now, right?
No, this is 2024. This is the last year.
Okay, this is last year. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And this all comes, this one story and the other stories, they all come together as a lesson, right? Like and we'll get there. It may take a half hour or more, honestly.
We got all the time.
It's my whole career. Like this is solidifying my whole career, ending with the blood test that we're going to talk about. But so here's what happened. So May 18th, I'm with my parents, and it's that time of year in Michigan when it's not too hot and it's not too cold. So there's no AC on, there's no heat on. And so I go to bed, and we have a cottage at a lake. It's a little vacation home. So I go to bed. I didn't have the windows open in the bedroom. So I wake up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., open up a window, and the air is still, so I don't get a fresh breeze at all. So then I wake up at 6:30, and I feel really bad. My heart's, chest heavy, just like it had been for 3 months. And as the morning went on and the sun rose, heating up the living room, the air got, hot and stale, and I just felt worse and worse and worse. I took my blood pressure, and it was 151 over 85, 151, and I can't breathe. So I told my parents, I'm going to urgent care. See ya. Wish me luck. Gave them a hug, drove to urgent care. EKG was normal. They said, we can't do anything else, go to ER. So I go to ER.
Were you hypoxic?
Definitely hypoxic.
Okay.
This is all from the gas leak.
Okay, but they took your pulse ox.
No, pulse ox normal.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. The thing is, now that I know the physiology of it, it's the lack of transfer of oxygen from the blood into the cells.
Okay.
So the blood can be filled with oxygen, but it's not getting into the cells.
Gotcha.
And what causes the transfer? B1. Vitamin B1. So I'll get there in a moment. So at the ER, they hook me up with all the cords. I'm laying in the bed. And as soon as they're done hooking me up with the cords, and there's 3 people, right? They all left the room. They just scurried out of there. They didn't say, hey, we're going to lunch. We'll be back in an hour. They didn't say that. They just left. And that's what they did. They went to lunch. So I'm just now by myself, and I got the monitor over there, and I got my phone is way over there. I can't get my phone. So I'm just watching the monitor. What else are you going to do? So I'm looking at my respiration, and it's going like this. Inhale. It's going like this. Okay. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. 5 to 8 seconds of no breathing. And I'm watching me not breathe on the monitor. And I'm like, what the heck? Am I not breathing? Maybe I have sleep apnea, or maybe I have, what's going on? And I start freaking out. And I'm like, okay, I got to relax. Okay, just relax. Okay, I'm all by myself, right? I can't call 911 because I'm already in the hospital, right? Nobody's there with me. I'm just by myself. So I'm like, okay, relax. Okay, then I fall asleep because I'm so relaxed. But then the monitor starts beeping red, and it says apnea 20 seconds. I'm like, oh, I haven't breathed in 20 seconds. I got sleep apnea. Okay, I know how to fix that.
So sorry.
Yeah.
You're quite literally in the you didn't go to sleep or pass out. You're literally watching this in real time.
On the monitor.
Say back to you.
Yeah, you're not breathing.
That you're not breathing,
Yeah.
even though you're aware that you didn't suddenly have a total loss of breath, right? You didn't.
No, I wasn't aware of my respiration capabilities, or the lack of.
Or at least, yeah, exactly, the lack of it.
Right.
There wasn't a catalyst event that could explain it to you.
No, I just had terrible chest pain, bad enough that I had to go to ER. Okay, so I realized, okay, I'm not breathing. How about, and the blood pressure cuff came on every 10 minutes, right? And it's high. It's let's say it's 140 over 85.
I mean, that's...
For me, it's terribly high. 117, 115 over 70 is good for me. My pulse, I was at the magic show yesterday at Planet Hollywood. The Chris, whatever his name is.
Chris
Angel. And I got my Garmin watch on. My pulse is 47. I'm super relaxed. They got the air conditioning on. 47. That's my normal pulse. 50. Yeah, I'm happy with that. But when it's 75 and 80 and 85 and I'm just sitting there, something's wrong for me. Anyways, so where am I at with this story?
Well,
yeah.
Just all I was saying was I think if I'm in your shoes and I'm watching and I'm seeing the apnea, I'm immediately thinking, was I just now gasping for air? Right? Or something to the effect of, but what you're saying is, and this seems to support where you're going, it sounds like, which is that your blood was oxygen rich, which is supported by the pulse ox.
Yes.
They're not making it into the cells.
Yes.
And that this is in some fashion being picked up by the device that's alerting back that you've got apnea.
No,
right?
And this is more about the actual respiration, the inhale, exhale.
Okay.
So what controls that? B1. B1. That's interesting. So, okay. Okay, so I think to myself, what if I'm just going to breathe? And then we'll see what happens with the monitor and my blood pressure. So I just start breathing with effort. It was like effort, like that for 10 minutes. And then my blood pressure cuff came on and my blood pressure came down. And then I did it 10 more minutes. And now my blood pressure is normal. And just when I see that, like, oh my God, it's 120/80 or whatever it was. I'm like, oh my God, okay, I'm just not breathing. I know how to fix it. And that's when these 3 people came back from their lunch break. And I was all excited. I was like, hey, look, the monitor shows apnea. Doesn't that cause high blood pressure? And they go, oh, it just means that the lead came off. It's usually a bad reading. Like that came off my chest. And I'm like, no. I'm not breathing. I don't think I'm breathing in the office at work either. Right? Then I just shut up. So then I agreed to do a CT of my brain to look for a stroke. I spent $10,000. After 5 hours, they kicked me out. They couldn't find anything. And I said, well, can you at least give me a blood pressure drug? They go, no, you don't qualify. I left there with no answers. So frustrating. So 10 days later, I'm with a patient. Again, I only use diet and supplements, right? And we're doing a Zoom call with this patient, just me and her. And she's, I don't know if I'm like helping her with parasites or whatever, but she's doing really good. And she goes, oh, by the way, she goes, I'm very happy because I've been taking high doses of synthetic B1 for 4 months and all of my neuropathy is gone. And I thought to myself, wait, I have neuropathy, my left arm and left leg. Maybe I need high doses of synthetic B1. And I carry benfotiamine. I've been carrying it for 12, 15 years. So again, I do the muscle testing biofeedback procedure and I test for it. And I took 3 pills. So it's 750 milligrams of benfotiamine. Within 1 hour, I was breathing so much easier. It was amazing. And in 2 weeks, I was 95% better with all my symptoms. And that kept me going. That was May 28th. It kept me going all summer and all fall. And then I found the gas leak December 7th. So despite having the presence of the gas leak, which was trying to kill me in the spring, the B1 saved my life all summer and all fall until I found the gas leak December 7th. So that's when I realized, and then, in the meantime, I was studying all kinds of videos and books about B1. And I have the opinion that B1 is the single most important nutrient for all human beings, including plants and animals. And it's endemically deficient and not enough people are talking about it. And medical hospitals and clinics and everybody needs to be using B1 for most people with chronic illness. And it'll be amazing how many symptoms go away when the patient's taking B1. High dose has got to be synthetic. And then in the meantime, find out why they're deficient in B1. So for me, it was the gas leak and toxic black mold and toxins, agricultural poisons. But for most people, it's going to be a high carb, malnourishing diet. And then for other people, it's coffee, tea, and alcohol. Right, so there's a lot of different causes of B1 deficiency. So there's your original question was, what was your health problem when you started school or something? That's there's all my stories about that.
No, I do find this is often the case with a lot of guests. I mean, certainly, it's what set a lot of my trajectory. Is you have what you would consider a crisis of your own health, and that can be a powerful motivator for learning. And for wanting to unpack this for everybody else.
Right.
Now, I like the approach of what you were saying in that, while I'm a bit skeptical, so first of all, I should emphasize I'm a super skeptic.
Like go for it.
There's almost every version of, hey, I've got an idea for the root of all chronic disease that people bring to me, and I'm like a cold, bucket of water a lot of times. However, this is something that I think is demonstrable in many respects, which is that where there is a need for something that is already known to be an essential nutrient, often where it seems that you can apply it to a large population and they get better, I believe that it's identifying a deficiency. And part of what you were saying that I like, that definitely ties back to my worldview on that regard, is that I have an analogy to kind of set the table, if you will. I call it the pyromaniac's neighborhood. So imagine a neighborhood that's full of people who just like playing with fire. And so they have a greater need than a normal neighborhood for fire protection. And so they benefit from there being nearby fire stations. It does mean that there's going to be more water damage from all of the putting out the fires. It does mean that they need to have more fire retardants, available. And therefore, they have a deficiency in fire retardants because of how much they have to fight fires, because of how much they like to play with fire. Whereas a normal neighborhood doesn't need that much compared to the pyromaniac's neighborhood. So we have two things in play. In the normal neighborhood, there is still a need for a fire station. You do still have some degree. And if there's no fire station, then that is a deficiency. You will eventually have fires that become problematic that you're like, we should have had a fire station there. Right.
Right.
But in the pyromaniac's neighborhood, it could be, easily 10 times the deficiency because of the state that they exist in.
Yeah.
Right. So by that token, it becomes really problematic to do things like set these reference ranges for vitamins, when I'm definitely a big believer in the immune response and how much the immune response requires things like a number of different proteins to be generated, which require a whole bunch of different nutrients for the context of the illness that they're fighting, right? So you could say that there's a nutrient sufficiency just to be met to deal with the backlog of repair of spin the wheel chronic diseases, right? Okay, yeah. So with that said, could we say, for example, vitamin D is broadly deficient in the Western world?
Yes.
I think we confidently can say that.
Yeah.
So if I say, listen, vitamin D, that's the best. The more, the better. It'll boost your immune system. Me, Dave Feldman, I'm going to say back to that, I'm going to say, is that though because there's a deficiency, that it's meeting a deficiency, and that actually at a certain point you have diminishing returns? Because once you've met that deficiency, you're fine. That's my default position.
Yeah.
So in the case of B1, I think that you may well be right in that it's a huge deficiency, and it could be for either of those two categories. Either one, because there just already is not enough in the diet to begin with for just day-to-day living. But there also could be a deficiency that's quite specific to the chronic diseases, for which there's a greater need for a greater dosage than would have been for the first category.
Right. I agree with you. Exactly. 100%.
Okay.
So no, in my clinic, I put a lot of people on vitamin D, and clinically, I don't see huge changes. But I've put 300 people on B1 in the last year and a half. Clinically, I've seen the best changes I've ever seen in my career. And I just had a patient 4 weeks ago. He saw me years ago, and now he's back. So 4 weeks ago, I said, all right, you're going to take benfotiamine, and I gave him one other thing. And I talked to him a couple of days ago, and he just listed off better endurance, better performance in the gym. Sleep is better. He's waking up with morning wood. His focus is better. Brain's better. Like all these things. Just B1. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I'll concede, me personally, usually I'm not counting on 100% success rate for whatever anybody is larger like theory is.
Yeah.
But I do think things like what you're describing, I could believe if there's a larger deficiency that's identified. This sounds like something you could turn into a study prospectively, right?
Right.
So you could get a number of patients that if you were trying to specifically identify what you believe would be the profile that would best benefit from supplementation of B1, pretty easy to RCT, right?
For sure. Yeah.
Maybe that's something you could get together.
Okay. Not that I need more stuff to do. Yeah.
Actually, let's jump into that real quick. You're not just a YouTuber.
Right.
I can't say that I know many YouTubers who have 1,000 videos. I looked, you have 1,000 videos. That's like a lot of videos. But I've noticed you kind of use it as a workbook of sorts. You like to just kind of share your care and the observations, and I'm assuming with permission by your patients.
Right.
It's quite a lot. Like you go through a lot of case reports and sort of what was working for who and so forth.
Right. Yeah. My original intention to get on the YouTube was to document my discoveries. And before that, I was using a yellow legal pad, just writing down. And I just decided to make videos about that.
All right. Let's get into lactic acidosis.
Yeah.
A subject you're not only familiar with, but as I do with all my guests, I try to like watch a little bit. And I was kind of hoping, I'll concede, I was kind of hoping I'd grok it in a few minutes. Sent me deep down the rabbit hole, the whole pyruvate connection and oxygen and all that stuff. Do you have a stump speech that you can kind of give us to bring us up to speed on it?
Yeah, I do. So going back to 2016 when I had the black mold toxicity. Now I was working in a moldy office for 13 years. And at the same time I had a moldy house. So the moldy house only caused constipation. But the moldy office was causing me the same symptoms I had with the gas leak from last year. So trouble breathing, chest pain, left arm numb, high blood pressure. Okay, that's the toxic mold. Now, in February 3rd of 2016, it was the worst night of my life. And just terrible thoughts and couldn't breathe. You know, it's 2:00 in the morning. And I'm just scrolling through my phone like, should I call an ambulance and have them pick me up, or should I drive to the hospital right now? I decided not to do any of that, and survived the night. And I was like, and you know, I was on a quest now to like find a doctor that could help me out. And at the same time, knowing that no doctor could help me out because my lipids are normal and I'm athletic. I still was working out during the day. I could run 3 miles during the day, and I could lift for 3 hours in the daytime. It was like worse at night, worse with the snow, worse with the rain. And so I have a collection of old medical and nutrition textbooks. I like to study the old stuff. And I was going through some of that material, and there was an article from 1959 on diet and exercise. And the author was talking about this mechanism of how people, get the mechanism of chronic illness. And he compared that with people who are athletic. So if you're sprinting, now your muscles are sore, you're out of breath, your blood pressure's up. That's lactic acidosis. So your body's run out of oxygen, and now it's using lactate as a fuel. And then the athlete recovers. But if you're chronically ill, and this is what was happening with me, I remember a Monday night, it's 10:00, I'm sitting on the couch and watching TV, and my heart is pounding, and I'm out of breath just sitting on the couch. This is 2016 again with the toxic mold. And when I read this article, I was like, wait, that's me. It's like I had just worked out, but yet I'm not recovering, you know, day after day, week after week, month after month, I'm not recovering. And so like, I realized that this is a mechanism, and I have this mechanism. Now, the author of this article was Dr. Roy Lee. He's the founder of what I call holistic nutrition. And in 1929, he started his company called Standard Process. They're still in business. In 1934, he released some supplements designed to tackle lactic acidosis. One of them was to raise blood pressure. The other one was to lower blood pressure. So it's like a heart nutrition, but also fixing lactic acidosis. So I started taking the correct supplement. I know you got some questions. I can see it in your eyes.
Oh, well, no, I'm still working. I'm in my brain. I'm already starting to try to work out what the mechanisms are.
Yeah, can I get there?
Yeah.
I'll get there.
Go ahead.
So I take this one supplement in particular, and over the course, let's say I took like 5 or 10. They're real small. Just I start chewing them. Tastes terrible. Chew them. For the next 4, 5, 6 hours, I felt calmer in the chest, blood pressure down, breathing easier. So I did that, for weeks and months. And then in October of 2016, then I found the mold in the office that was causing all this. And my solution was to move out. So it took me a year and a half. I moved out. Then I started detoxing the mold. So the mold was the cause. The mechanism is lactic acidosis. Here's the mechanism. So you have a toxin in your body, in your blood, and now there's some theories. There's conflicting theories throughout the decades, right? So if I said this in the 60s, they would say no, but, right? If I said it in the 30s, they say yeah. But here's the basis. There's toxins in the blood, and there's not enough oxygen in the blood. Okay, so I'm gonna use, here's my fingers. This is waste. Okay, and then on my other hand, I got O for oxygen. So waste goes up, oxygen goes down. This right here, this unbalance will then make your arteries dilate. So the body's trying to get more oxygen to the cells and get more waste out of the body. So that's why this makes the arteries dilate. Okay, and that makes your blood pressure go up, or it makes your heart beat faster. And now you have capillary dilation. Even the capillaries will expand. And now capillary engorgement and a stagnation of the circulation of the blood. And the cells are trying to get the oxygen, but there's no oxygen there. And the cells are also trying to dump their waste, but they can't do that because the blood's already toxic. And now the cells start to starve and die. So now you have cellular death. And then death of cells becomes death of tissues, and then glands and organs, and body death. I think most people die of lactic acidosis. And it's not, because it's a mechanism, right? It's not a disease diagnosis. So the solution is clean the blood up and raise the oxygen. And I feel like I'm missing something right here. So the capillary engorgement. Yeah, so how do you get the blood cleaned up? Well, in the 30s, they said, make sure the liver is well fed, eat liver. And there's liver supplements that they made. And then how do you decrease the acidosis? Like the hydrogen will go up. And that's a waste product coming from the cells, especially if you have like eating too much sugar. Okay, so the way that you clean up the hydrogen is by adding oxygen, and then you form water. And so what's the best food for that? It's red meat because of heme, iron, and myoglobin. So you load the body up with red meat, and that can help get rid of the acid. So back in the 30s, though, they didn't really understand that this is a mechanism. They thought it was a cause. And they thought if you fix lactic acidosis, then you cure chronic disease. And they had a bunch of theories, and they had glandulars, and then they thought it was minerals. They called it demineralization. And then through the 40s, well, then World War II happened. And so all this was kind of debunked by 1961. Although I disagree with that. I don't want to get into all that stuff, but
you disagree that it was entirely debunked,
right? And here's why. Here, just to summarize that. So lactic acidosis happens outside of the mitochondria, but what's happening inside the mitochondria, they didn't know back then, but we know now. Now we call it mitochondrial dysfunction. So, and that's the basis of chronic disease. And there's books on this, and there's articles about this, right? So mitochondrial dysfunction happens in the mitochondria, and at the same time, lactic acidosis can happen outside of the mitochondria. So it's like one and the same thing. They happen at the same time, right? They're different enough, but in the 30s, they called it lactic acidosis. Now we call it mitochondrial dysfunction. So the whole point is fix the physiology. You put the biochemistry, the biology, you got to fix the actual, biochemistry of how the cells and mitochondria are working. And what's the first thing you got to do with that? Clean. You have to detox. That's how you start cleaning up the cells and the mitochondria to fix lactic acidosis / mitochondrial dysfunction. So now people, and a lot of people talk about, well, take magnesium. A lot of holistic doctors, I'm not faulting them for this. There's so much talk about magnesium, right? I'm a fan. I'm on magnesium right now, right? But magnesium would not save my life from parathion, toxic mold, or a gas leak. Like, it's not going to save your life, okay? And then, name another nutrient. I don't know. But to be honest, it's more about detoxing. So binders, zeolite, bentonite clay, activated charcoal, bioactive carbon technology, like that kind of stuff. That is that's how you start repairing your body from chronic illness. So go ahead with your questions.
No, this is, again, I kind of took a bit of a crash course.
Yeah.
You've got multiple ways by which you're ultimately turning your fuel into acetyl-CoA before it's going to head into the TCA cycle.
Right.
Between carbohydrates and acetyl-CoA,
yes.
You've got conversion to glucose.
Yes.
Glucose coming into pyruvate. If I'm remembering this correctly.
There's like 11 to 13 steps to make pyruvate.
But pyruvate's a key moment.
Right.
Because
pyruvate is right outside the mitochondria.
And we're right now in the status check. Are we oxygenated enough or not?
Right. And if we're not
oxygenated enough, then it starts to head the direction of lactate.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it heads into our container that we've got all the steps in, which is ultimately the TCA cycle, right? Or acetyl-CoA and then the TCA cycle.
Right.
So of my crash course, what I understand is you're going to end up with lactic acidosis either from an overproduction of lactate or from an underutilization of pyruvate.
Yes.
And that's where it gets back to what you're alluding to with regard to there being mitochondrial dysfunction.
At the same time as lactic acidosis.
Well,
sometimes, not always.
Well, that one way to get to lactic acidosis is for there to be a rate limiter into the TCA cycle such that pyruvate is getting stuck heading into the anaerobic direction.
Right. What's that rate? What's the rate limiter?
And that's the question that's not answered very well in the...
I got it.
So there's a few different ones from what I understand, but like, for example, glycogen storage disease is one.
Oh, yeah.
But
B1.
B1, okay.
It's B1.
Well, okay, so here, let's zoom in real quick. Because one is that there's like diseases like I just mentioned, right? So glycogen storage disease type 1, I think, is one for which there's a lack of synthesis of, I think, the key protein or proteins related to that coming into the disposal in the TCA cycle.
Yeah.
Sorry for everybody who's listening to this and we're nerding out, but we got to nerd out for a moment. Okay. So that's a genetic predisposition that resulted in that rate limiter, right? Okay. Another rate limiter is some kind of acquired disease, right? But you're now describing a vitamin insufficiency in B1, I'm guessing, that becomes a rate limiter because it's part of the crucial ingredients for that shuttling of pyruvate past that step.
Right, and converting it to acetyl-CoA as it goes into the mitochondria.
Okay.
B1 does that.
Gotcha.
And B1 is in charge of 5 reactions in the mitochondria. And B1 gets oxygen from the blood into the cells. And B1's in charge of making carbon dioxide and getting carbon dioxide out of the cells into the blood. And B1 is in charge of, it's the most important nutrient for your autonomic nervous system, which controls respiration and most of digestion. So like when I wasn't breathing, my lungs were not expanding and contracting because my autonomic nervous system was not well fed with B1. So, it's like physiological organ function here, lungs, and the muscles, the diaphragm. And then biochemically at the level of the mitochondria. It's a B1 deficiency all up and down. That's what I experienced, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So it'd be fair to say that your grander theory is an insufficiency in B1, possibly due to an excess, getting back to my pyromaniacs neighborhood.
Yeah.
Possibly due to further environmental or external impacts.
I'm going to say high-calorie malnutrition.
High-calorie malnutrition.
That is the pyromania in these neighborhoods. Is 53% of our diet is junk food.
Okay. And this creates conditions for which there is a B1 insufficiency.
Yes.
That ultimately results in more pyruvate heading towards the lactate direction. Now, the piece where we haven't fully explored, that doesn't need much exploring, is that rate limitation means that if you've got greater pyruvate heading in the direction of becoming lactate, that creates ultimately a lactic acid buildup.
Right.
And there's a test for that. You can test serum levels of lactate.
Right. Yes. And that's can be done by athletes at schools or whatever. You can buy a machine, kind of like Keto Mojo, right? Just poke your finger and test your blood.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's like $400 or whatever. But let me go back to a sentence that you were saying. So a B1 deficiency can be rate limiting and cause lactic acidosis, right? And then the question is like, where in the body is a person experiencing that the most? Is it cardiovascular, like what I had? Or is it like, it could be peripheral neuropathy for other people. It could be digestive. Or, you can have pockets of B1 deficiency, like brain, cerebellum, and then people walk funny, ataxia or giddiness, which is like a swimming sensation. So what I'm saying is that B1, when I was studying this last year, I gave a presentation in December of 2024 on the subject of B1. And I went through all my resources and I had, I think it was 70 or maybe a little bit more, 70 symptoms of B1 deficiency. And it's broken up in these different categories. Decades ago or centuries ago, it was wet beriberi or dry beriberi. So wet beriberi was congestive heart failure, fluid in the lungs. Dry beriberi was peripheral neuropathy. But it's way more than that now. So it should be in these categories. Is it cardiovascular, metabolic, GI, nervous system, right? So it's like these compartments of the body, major compartments of the body. So then I think most people have a B1 deficiency. If you're chronically ill, certainly. And then so people have these series of symptoms and they say, oh, it looks like I should go see this specialist. So they go to a specialist who's treating the deficiency of B1 by treating the symptoms, right? They're treating the symptoms of this disease. They have a diagnosis. Well, theoretically, you can give that person B1 and then their condition is greatly improved or maybe even reversed. And the whole time it was a B1 deficiency. So I have a medical doctor friend whose brother has Parkinson's. She recently put him on high doses of B1 and he's responding greatly. She just texted me yesterday. He's doing so much better on high dose B1. And there are studies with people with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's on high dose B1 with great results actually reversing it. Now, in that case, they need high doses because it's driving mitochondrial function, right? It's more nutraceutical, medicinal, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to being deficient. So I think a lot of, I think B1 was used more often prior to the 1960s. Now I have a patient whose sister was a nurse in the 1960s. And she said, this is like a few months ago, she said that people would come into the ER and they're all messed up, right? They're just whatever. And they would shoot them up with B1 and send them on their way. Like B1 is like a common thing, but they didn't say, okay, you're drinking too much alcohol. What's your diet like? Like what, are you living in a moldy house? They didn't do a history. They just shot them up with B1. That was their main therapy. So I think B1 needs to be, more investigated and used more.
Granted, I don't want to make it sound like it's super easy, but as you know, I'm in the middle of doing our own study ourselves.
Yeah.
For as much more, how to say this the right way. While I'll concede, it's been way more work and a lot more of a headwind than I could have ever imagined. It has been very rewarding because we just quite literally went and got that data, right?
Yeah.
I feel like an RCT with B1 could actually be done in a tenth of the work that I was doing on my end.
Now there's that book called High-Calorie, Malnutrition, Thiamine Deficiency, and Dysautonomia. That's the name of the book. Dr. Lonsdale and Dr. Chandler Mars. And it came out in 2017 and it has 1,000 references. So there's a ton of studies. And I have 5 books that were published between 1929 and 1960, all talking about B1 and how important it is. So the data's there. It's just not being used. We don't have to do any RCTs. It's already there. We're done with that.
But probably a lot of people will say that's a bit older work. I'm not defending it. I'm not defending that position. Just that, especially if it's got a better linking to modern disease. I think, I don't know, just a thought.
Right. But, so, and then Dr. Otto Warburg, he's the founder of physiology. That's the one study that he deserved, a dozen Nobel Prizes. He only got one because he was a jerk. Nobody liked him. And he knew he was a jerk. But anyways, in 1929, he did work and he discovered what at the time was B1, but he called it the ferment of respiration, or the respiratory enzyme. That's what they called it. And then he got the Nobel Prize in 1931. So, it's like that's kind of like, in my opinion, like that's the beginning of understanding physiology, B1, right? And so then they started adding that to bread in 1934, I believe. And before that, bread was just starch. It was refined starch. And people were having beriberi. So like 10-year-old boys were having heart attacks, wet beriberi from B1 deficiency. Again, this is during the Great Depression. People didn't have money for vegetables or meat, so they were going to places to get loaves of bread. And so the public health, they added B1 to the bread, and within a few months, all these cases nationwide were reversed of wet beriberi heart attacks and stuff.
I hadn't actually heard of this before. That's fascinating.
Right? Yeah, these are my old nutrition and medical textbooks. I had a friend tell me, if you don't know your history, you don't know your future. So that was when I was in college. I was like, okay, I'm going to study my history so I know.
Well, and let me defend. I mean, again, while I know what critics will tend to say, I mean, quite literally, the ketogenic diet is 100 years old. Yeah. And it was a solution that got lost. Like, I'm still blown away by how well it was working, even though they didn't understand back then, for example, the vitamin complement that you'd need to have so that it was nutritionally complete. Shakes, for example, for those who had epilepsy. But they had it. They had it, and they were getting better at making use of it. And then ultimately it got lost to, pharmacotherapy for decades.
Right. And there were fasting clinics that were active in the 19-teens, and the federal government shut them down. Do you know that story?
I don't.
So it was by 1917, 1919, definitely 1920, they're all shut down. And that's when the Mayo Clinic, and then but you had these parents with these epileptic kids, and they're like, well, what do we do now? We used to go to the fasting clinic, but now they're gone. So that's when the Mayo Clinic said, well, we'll make a diet that mimics fasting. So in 1925, the Mayo Clinic had the diet that mimics fasting, which we now know as the ketogenic diet, which, by the way, is deficient in B1, the ketogenic diet.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. So what's the primary sources of B1 in food?
Pork, but you got to eat like 12 pounds a day to have. B1 is like in all foods, but in such small amounts. And even when you take a lot, the body only stores 30 milligrams of B1. So when I was taking 750 milligrams for 6 months, I got more and more sufficient, and another interesting thing about B1 is like, it'll solve symptoms at the beginning for a lot of people, right? And then a lot of people who are pretty healthy, they don't need it for a long period of time. Let's say they only need it for 6 months. That's kind of common. I've seen that now several times. So 6 months later, they don't need B1. Well, how do you know that you don't need it anymore? Those old symptoms come back. The ones that were cured 6 months ago that B1 got rid of, they come back. And it's like, so I felt this grinding in my heart for 2 weeks. And this is November of 2024. And I'm like, what is going on? And I was going through my research and stuff. And sure enough, there it is. B1 can cause the symptoms that it cured. So I stopped B1 within 2 days, 3 days. I was back to normal.
Can I ask a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
Were the symptoms of what was going on with your heart, was it close to, say, costochondritis? I know you'd probably know that.
Right. No, I mean, that's what Google says, costochondritis, and they'll say pleurisy, and it'll say myocarditis.
Was there like palpitations or anything like that? Or was it just, because you were describing it as like a tightness? Tightness.
I mean, I had all the symptoms. I mean, I was given a prescription for nitroglycerin and Pepsid, AC for heartburn. And I, when I didn't know what was going on, I thought it was gallbladder dysfunction, but then my feet were swollen. So then I thought it was lymphatic congestion. And then my body temperature is cold. So I'm thinking it's the thyroid. But the truth is it's all of it and it's none of it, because it's all in the mitochondria from head to toe. So this is the most holistic thinking that you can get into. This is revolutionary for all of medicine, to think like cells and mitochondria, head to toe.
So I want to talk a little bit more about black mold because, as you said, you didn't actually know about it. Probably if people weren't catching, you can have black mold exposure, have absolutely no idea. There's not a scent. You just have symptoms of it. And then you later find out it's in the house, or you have ways to detect it.
Right.
How did you ultimately figure out that that's what it was?
Well, in the summer of 2016, I felt so bad. I had to reduce my work hours. So at the time I was working 3.5 days a week. So I cut it to 3 days a week. And then I actually saw patients for a longer period of time, so I was seeing less people per week. Okay. So now I have a 4-day weekend, Friday all through Monday. And so I'm at home taking supplements, working out, not knowing what the heck was going on. And through the summer, I was doing better and better. I remember in the fall, it was October, end of October, and I came to work on Tuesday morning, starting my work week Tuesday morning, and I had no chest pain for the first time in a long time, and probably a year. And I was very happy about that. But by 1 o'clock, lunchtime, my chest pain was a 6 out of 10. I was like, okay, now I know it's absolutely 100%. It's in the office. And it's either one of two things. I either have bad wiring causing dirty electricity in the walls or something, or it's that little black patch where the paint had come off the wall and there's black exposure, right? Because the paint was hanging down. And I was like, maybe that's black mold, right? So I took that sample, and around the corner was a lab. So I put in a little baggie, I gave it to them, and it came back positive: Aspergillus, Stachybotrys, Penicillium. And, Aspergillus and Stachybotrys, those are both deadly. And I was like, okay, I'm onto something now. So I either have to move out or they're going to fix it. And I knew they weren't going to fix it, so I had to move out.
There were other people that were working in the office?
Yeah.
And were they experiencing any symptoms?
Yeah. And I realized it too. I was like, why are my staff not getting better? Like, this is a health improvement center. It's called the Nutritional Healing Center. Why are they not getting better? And that was the reason why. And so here's what was happening. So the building was built in 1990, and it was prefab walls that they just stuck into the ground, like sort of like concrete pseudo brick, right? And sideways rain would drive right through it. The walls were porous. So when it was windy and rainy, the rain would come in and touch the drywall on the inside.
Wow.
So you couldn't see it because it was on the other side. But now my windows would rain on the inside, right? Like the windows it was raining inside. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Coming down from the top of the wall. And there's, and now this building was one of 4, and it was a total of 100,000 square feet. And when you walk by these windows of the other 4 buildings, the other 3 buildings, you could see water stains everywhere. And what's funny is right now in this complex, there's a water mold remediation company, and they're in a moldy building, right? Anyways, I just think that's funny. So now, if you're wondering if you have mold in your house, you can do an ERMI test, ERMI, and you can also just you can hire a professional. They'll test your air, and you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and you get like a Petri dish or an air capture test for like, I don't know, $100 or whatever, capture the mold and then send it to a lab. So, and then otherwise you're looking with your own eyes. You're looking for black mold. Maybe you have to tear through some drywall. You're smelling it, especially if it's rainy or humid. You're looking in your vents and you're smelling, right? You're using your senses. So that's how you got to investigate. And let's not forget the other causes of like toxic buildings. So I already mentioned the gas leaks. You can buy a $25 pen-looking structure that you can turn on. It'll smell gas. You buy that off Amazon. But also bat guano. People have bats in their attic. That is a problem. And radon. So different parts of the country have high radon, including where I live. So when I moved into my house, by law, you have to test for radon, and it was normal. And but then I had my crawl space insulated, So now the air doesn't leave the crawl space. It just goes straight up into the building, into the house. So radon, I tested radon this past spring, and sure enough, it was high. So I was living in radon for 5 years, and that can cause trouble. I had a patient, this year, and she would wake up every morning with really high blood pressure and just feeling really bad, chest pain. I put her on B1. The chest pain went away. And then she heard my story about the radon, because I put that on YouTube. And so her and her husband talked about it. They had a radon mitigation system in the house. It just wasn't plugged in. So he plugged it in, turned it on. The next morning she woke up, blood pressure normal. I think a lot of people with high blood pressure, yes, they have metabolic syndrome, but let's not forget about, it could be radon, it could be toxic mold, it could be histoplasmosis from bat guano in your attic.
Or just a combination.
Combination of all of it. Yeah, it's complex. This is it. Complex chronic illness. Heart disease is a complex chronic illness. It's not just LDL. It's not just ApoB or whatever. It's lipoprotein A. It's more than just the lipids. There's other factors. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest blind spots right now is how much the environment is impacting everything. I remember when for like a little while, people were doing, it was kind of a hotness for a while, is the glasses that you'd put on at night to block out the blue light or something like that. And I don't want to be dismissive of it, but for some people it seemed to be very effective. But even as I was looking at that, I was like, I just have a feeling there are other environmental considerations that probably outrank it, that just aren't sexy and new and cool to talk about. 100%. Like you're talking. So gas leak's a great example. Naturally, the first thing I think of when I hear that is, oh, well, that's all right, because you can smell the gas because they typically put the odor into it. But actually, what if it's a tiny gas leak?
Right.
If it's a tiny gas leak, I could see that not being something we would smell. Longer term exposure, so you got that AUC for a long enough time, that could be a problem for sure.
Yeah.
But you don't normally have a gas leak detector in a typical home.
So I told this to a patient. He goes, yeah, he does fence and installation and repair. He goes, I'm in people's backyards all the time. I smell gas all the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you do? Like in order to just find these things, you've just got to be mindful to know to look.
Yeah, you got to be a detective.
So you would speculate that a decent component of chronic disease, maybe not entirely, but at least combinatorially, could be environmental exposures like you yourself have kind of endured.
Right.
And in 2 of your 3 cases, you didn't know for months.
Right.
Right. So for the black mold, it was what, 9 months, 10 months, something like that?
Right. Well, I was in the office for 13 years.
Oh, wow.
And I had my original heart symptom was 2009. And I moved in there, 2004 or whatever. So, yeah. But it just got worse and worse. And 2016 was my worst year.
Do you think that if you just literally moved into a different office, you might not have experienced that event?
Right. Yeah. And so, as a clinician, one way to learn fast is to get really, really sick and almost die several times. So, it speeds up your learning curve, right?
Right.
So, and people told me, well, it must be God's plan, or, from pain to purpose. I'm like, shut up. Like, I could have just gone to a seminar, but no, I had to learn it for myself.
Well, that was the case with me and cholesterol. Like so here I am, my dad, my sister, all of us, we have just this wonderful 6-7 months of discovering keto, and we're all killing it. And they get their blood work first and their cholesterol hardly moved. And I'm like, okay, cool. We're not part of that genetic milieu.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden mine skyrockets. And yeah, had I not experienced all of those benefits from keto, like if I'd got my blood work like right away, it's a pretty decent chance I wouldn't be on a keto diet right now, or definitely wouldn't be connected to all this research. But it's because of all the benefits, while having to face simultaneously this just gigantic leap in my cholesterol.
Right.
Became a massive motivator.
Right.
And really derailed me from everything I was doing to just focusing on that.
Right.
But it's been a regular theme in this podcast is a lot of people like yourself, they have to face the darkness, the deep darkness of just how bad things can get.
Right. So when the symptoms are persisting, for months and years, and then, I mean, thank God we have YouTube and we can have, absolutely great information for free, basically. So can we start talking about MVX?
Yeah.
Okay. So you had COSI, and then in May of 2024, you released a video with Dr. Bill Cromwell talking about MVX, the blood test. So I watched that video and I thought it was interesting. And I thought it was interesting enough to watch it again and again. And it's basically this blood test that measures longevity. And the purpose is to determine how long somebody might live in the presence of disease. So cardiac catheterization, MS, liver transplant, cancer, whatever. So, and they measure 6 factors. And they started off with 30, I think. And they brought it down to 6. As a matter of fact, ketones were originally one of the 6 factors, but they kicked that out and they brought in the amino acids. Right? That's interesting. So I'm watching this video and like, okay, what are these 6 factors? So I start diving into these 6 factors. Now this is summer of 2024 while I'm suffering from the gas leak and taking the B1. And I realize these 6 factors are measuring physiology. They're not measuring risk factors. Completely different subject, right? And I realized I've been fixing these 6 factors my whole career. And what is it possible to run MVX, find out what of the 6 factors need the most attention, address them, and then improve the overall score, and then actually show that people live longer, and then show health improvement using MVX plus. So there's that. And before I go on, you want to share something about that, or you want to?
No,
Okay.
You were reaching out to me about this talk that I'd put out from COSI, and you were you had fire in your belly. This was maybe you and I'd kind of been chatting here and there. I want to say 7 years, 8 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I had found your channel from like a while ago, and so we just we were occasionally chatting. But you definitely, I hadn't heard you speak of anything like you spoke of this, and yes, from your position, it sounded like it was something pretty exciting.
Right. So the 6 factors, I'll say what they are. So glyc measures infection and or inflammation. I should say and also trauma. Okay, so, and then the next one is small HL particle count as measured by NMR. And that's more about toxicity, not diet. And then there is the 3 branched chain amino acids, valine, leucine, and isoleucine. That's measuring nutrition or malnutrition, including amino acids, protein digestion. Are you eating enough protein? And then can you assimilate it? So B1 deficiency, right? So I fix a lot of people's digestion just by adding B1. And then the last one is citrate. So citrate is the beginning of the citric acid cycle in the mitochondria. And if you don't have enough citrate in the mitochondria, you have mitochondrial dysfunction. So basically these 6 factors of MVX are measuring malnutrition, infection, inflammation, toxicity, which all then lead to mitochondrial dysfunction. So those are the 5 things that it really measures, the big subjects.
Well, let me interject one thing real quick. So this is still a blood test.
Right, NMR, yeah.
So like, for example, with citrate being in the blood may not be 1-to-1 with what's making its way into
exactly, yeah. So why would it be high in the blood?
Right.
Because it's not getting into the mitochondria.
Okay.
Why? Well, at first I thought, well, it's not getting in there because of toxicity. But that's not true. It's not getting in there because the mitochondria aren't working. So it's kind of like you feed them, and there's 22 nutrients that the mitochondria need. And Chandler Mars, who wrote that book I mentioned earlier about B1, she's got a Facebook group called Understanding Mitochondrial Nutrition. And she said there's 22 nutrients that mitochondria need. So I just had the idea, well, why don't we there are supplements that have these nutrients. So I just give my patients these supplements, and then their citrate comes down, and their mitochondria work better, and their energy goes up. So there's that.
So this is me putting on my skeptic hat to some degree. Whatever's in the blood is what is in transit and not yet in use. there can be buildup related to an insufficient clearance or insufficient usage. Clearance usually is kind of talked about as though it's a waste product. You want to dispose of it or something to that effect. That can be the case, like in the case of lactate, right? Yeah. Where we're talking about lactic acid acidosis. Something like iron. When iron's high in the blood, it can be very, potentially concerning in that regard. But some things can be built up because there's that lack of taking them up by the cells.
Right.
And so in the case of citrate, it sounds as if that's what you're describing, is there's an inability by the cells to shuttle enough citrate into the cytosol. Would that be a fair statement? Yeah. So that I do find interesting, but bringing it back to the amino acids found in the serum, I'm definitely a big believer that you can have protein insufficiency, but even then, I don't even like protein insufficiency. I like amino acid sufficiency because it's always talked about like it's this homogeneous blob, and it's not. You really need to be mindful. Like leucine's a great example. Leucine deficiency is a big deal if you're a human, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a big deal for all of the animal kingdom, but in particular, I think that that's an amino acid we're commonly deficient in a standard American diet, right? So if possible, you'd want to be mindful of those amino acids. As I understand, MVX was determined, and you probably know the history a little bit better than I do, algorithmically in the same way like LPIR was. They were looking at a lot of the different associations against also some additional hypotheses that they had, and that's how they came up with this calculation. And then work that against the epidemiological data on association, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so, and I am also, Siobhan and I are big fans of glycate as a inflammatory marker, at least against the data we've seen internally with Own Your Labs and with ourselves. It seems to be a surprisingly, at least anecdotally, accurate inflammatory marker.
Yeah.
Whereas something like C-reactive protein, I love C-reactive protein, but it also can have a lot of false positives. And I feel like we didn't see as many false positives, again, anecdotally.
Yeah, glycate is a multi-marker. There's 4 different things that it measures. Right. And then it associates really well with CRP, TNF alpha, all the fun things we talk about, inflammatory markers. Yeah.
So bringing MVX back into what I think both you and I are very interested in, certainly I'm extremely interested in cardiovascular disease. But my concern is that I feel a lot of times studies look just at a specific endpoint of interest without powering enough to all the rest of the non-endpoint of interest, such that you can't make a conclusion on all-cause mortality. That's a big problem I have with a lot of heart disease studies, is you can't make a claim of mortality, in my opinion, without it being all-cause mortality. So saying you died less of disease X doesn't tell me whether it's because you've died more of non-disease X, right? So to be sure, it won't stop them from extrapolating from it. And it's not even that I'm saying I'm sure they're wrong, only that I really do want to see data against all-cause mortality before I can take that at face value. So in the case of MVX, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not just speaking to cardiovascular disease and mortality. It is at least attempting to assert that it could be associated with lower all-cause mortality. Is that right?
Right. So exactly. So when Dr. Bill Cromwell presented the data at COSI, he had 5 cohorts, and CathGen, Intermountain Heart, Prevend. Okay, so I think it was 5 or 6. So all but 1 were cardiovascular cohorts. And then the other one was normal healthy. Okay, now, was it June of this year, 2025? I think it was June or April. A study was done, UK Biobank, and it was almost 300,000 people. And they're all normal healthy. And so it's the same results. When you look at the graph that they have showing how MVX can predict, it predicts whether or not you're going to survive the next 5 years and to what percentage. And so you get an overall score, 1 to 100. You want your score to be low. So if your score is, let's say, 30, then your chance of mortality in the next 5 years is like 2%. But if your score is, let's say, 75 out of 100, your chance of mortality is 60%. So, it's exactly what you're saying. They have a theory, and they get put together these multi-markers, and then they do some advanced math, right? And they're using NMR, and then they're comparing that with epidemiological surveys, right? So that's exactly what they've been doing.
Now, to be fair, it's associational data. We always have to throw on that caveat. It could be, for example, it could be diseases that affect those markers are the root cause, and then the mortality is what's associated with it. So it's something that's causing both, right?
So,
but that doesn't mean it's no longer useful. It's just, if we acknowledge that it could be that it's picking up upstream what the root cause is, that's not a bad thing.
Right.
But it is worth making that note that things you do to change what's part of this multi-marker, these different pieces, may or may not be causally related to the outcome that you're trying to change, if that makes sense.
That's true. Okay, but so the question is, what's causing that person to have that condition? And MVX measures the 5 most important things. Now, I'm not saying that because I have my own theory from my own seeing tens of thousands of patients. We're going back 90 years because those original founders of medicine, they said the same thing. They said there are 5 problems that cause chronic disease. And there's, different people said different things. Some people said lactic acidosis is all. But other people are saying, but wait a minute, there's toxicity. Obviously, they talked about nutrition. Other people obviously talking about infection and, inflammation. And so as I was reading these books, going back all these years, I put together a graphic, and it's 3 circles. And what they said, 80, 90 years ago was, in order to address chronic illness, you have to fix all 3 circles. Number 1, fix the cause. Number 2, fix the mechanism. And number 3, to get rid of symptoms, you feed the organs. So that's, Dr. Henry Harrower, the founder of endocrinology, had a company where they made glandular supplements. So you could buy liver, you could buy ovary, you could buy brain, you could buy, skin, you could buy bone, and take those supplements. So when you feed the organs, they get really happy, the symptoms go away, but you still have to fix the cause, right? And you still have to fix the mechanism. So now with those causes, there are 3 main causes. One is a bad diet. The second one is infections. The third one is toxicity. Okay, and then there's several mechanisms. As a matter of fact, I know that there's more than 20 mechanisms, but lactic acidosis, mitochondrial dysfunction, is absolutely the most important one and the most common one. So having said all that, MVX measures all these things I just told you about. So you can have normal glyc, you can have normal citrate, branched chain amino acids are normal, but the small molecule particles are crazy low, meaning they're super toxic. So MVX is telling you, you have to detox. Mm-hmm. Now I have other patients, everything's in pretty good shape, but their glyc is crazy high. So now I know they have organisms and or infection, and so we have to address their immune system, right? So MVX directs the doctor where to go for that particular patient. Now there's some patients, they need a little bit of everything. For other patients, it's like, this is, they got 2 out of the 5 things that we have to address. So I'm using it clinically. And I see what you're looking at it like predicting mortality, which is the original intent. Is it like how long you're going to live?
Oh, well, no, it's just, I like mortality because I'm a jerk engineer who loves something that everyone will agree on, right? Yeah. So the challenge with all studies, with all science really, is particularly when it comes to things that there can be a placebo effect or something for which, I hear of an intervention that I want to try and I feel better after I've tried it. How can I quantify how well I feel? How
MVX.
can I? Yeah,
MVX.
So, yeah. So
absolutely.
And so that's the thing, is how much we can make something binary. I tend to like, but I fully concede mortality is a high bar.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to, first of all, there's only one time that you die.
And it's so like clinical relevance is what I'm looking for. What do I do with the patient that's in front of me right now?
Exactly.
So let me give you this scenario. So I told you about the gas leak. I found the cause, December 7th. Had the gas company come out and they fixed it. As a matter of fact, they found 3 different locations for gas leaks in my residence. And now in 2024, thinking I'm going to die, I decided I'm going to take a winter break. So I went to Florida for 9 weeks, beginning Christmas Day, drove down Christmas Day. And now prior to that, for about 4 or 5 months, I was trying to get MVX activated for the public. And I called up the NIH and they said, we're not going to turn it on. And they gave me 2 reasons why. I'm going to tell you why. Number 1, it doesn't measure disease. And I told the guy, and you know the guy, I'm not going to say his name. You know who he is.
I know.
And I told him, I understand that. I said, it measures physiology. This is a different thing. But it's a problem that it doesn't measure disease, right? Because that's what medicine's based off of. And the other thing is, he said, we're waiting for consensus. And I was like, oh my God, I hate that statement because it sounds very communistic, but I'm talking to a guy in the government, so whatever. Now I called another lab, I'm not going to say names, and they emailed me and they said, we're not going to release this because we don't want to look like voodoo doctors. I was like, okay, whatever. So then I called NASA because I know a rocket scientist at NASA. And he goes, well, our medical doctors, they're just going to run to the NIH people anyways. So I gave up on them. I called about 5 other labs, thinking that they had an NMR machine, even LabCorp, and they wouldn't turn it on. And they own the patent for it. They wouldn't turn it on. So January 6th, I called up Professional Co-op Services. Now, this is a third party, like a vendor. They're a vendor for labs. At Professional Co-op, there's about 10 employees. And they're a third party vendor. Okay, that's what I'm going to say about that. And I called them up, and I didn't know who I was talking to. I just had a question. I was trying to piecemeal MVX together by myself and then do the advanced math with ChatGPT. So I was trying to figure out small HDL particle count. And I said on the phone, I was like, okay, if we take your total HDL particle count, subtract large HDL particle count, do we end up with small? And he said, yes. I was like, okay, good. It took me like 2 weeks to get that answer. I was like, oh, thank you. I was so happy to hear that. And then we kind of chatted. And then he says, and then I said, you know what? I'm just really excited about MVX. He goes, we have that. And I said, I know, which I didn't know. I said, I know you've run that on 30,000 people for the NIH, but I can't get it for myself or my patients. He goes, give me 15 minutes. I'll turn it on. That's how we got MVX activated for the general public. January 6th, 2025. So this is September. It's still a brand new lab, right? Not many people know about it.
Is this not LabCorp? Or it is?
Professional Co-op Services sells LabCorp labs
I see.
and other labs from other companies. So It's like a vendor, right?
So we'll chat offline after this. I know you were trying to see if we could get it set up with Own Your Labs.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And the main change since we had last been chatting is we now have an entirely overhauled new platform. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
And in that new platform, we'll be able to do some things we couldn't do when I was chatting with you before.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna
wait before. Can I tell you the price? Can I tell you the price of MVX Plus?
Go ahead.
Make sure you order MVX Plus, not just MVX, because you got to get all the data. The wholesale cost for the doctor is, depending on where you order from, it's either $20 or $22. It is the most important lab test in all of medicine, in my opinion, and it's $20. Now, every doctor is going to have their upcharges. I got my admin fee, and then I got to pay my other practitioners. I got 9 other doctors that work for me, so there's going to be an upcharge. So instead of, and then it directs you down the right path. So I have the $600 hypercoagulation panel if your glyc-A is high. I have the $540, organisms panel, or the total, the toxicity panel for, $650. I have these very expensive tests, but the MVX tells you which one to order for the patient. Brilliant. And it saves so much money for the patients.
And so here you are putting yourself out of business is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah. I'm putting a lot of people out of business.
Well, I'm interested in checking it out. Of the things you mentioned, there is one that I may have more of an informed opinion on that I'm interested in, which is you were talking about HDL particle count.
Yeah.
When you're saying HDL particle count is high.
Low. If it's low, that's toxicity.
It's toxicity.
Yeah.
So I might gently push back on that one.
Yeah, go for it. Again, I'm going to say this, and anybody can debate me on this. I'm the only one really trying to figure out MVX plus in the world. I'm the only one doing it. So anybody can give me advice. I need it. Okay, go ahead.
No. Well, I mean, the whole purpose of this is just conversational, whatever, right? Are you familiar with the lipid energy model?
Yes.
My model? Okay.
Yep.
So just to do a recap for anybody just tuning in, it's centered a lot around the phenotype of lean mass hyperresponders. We believe that they're a centralized example of fat adaptation in an otherwise metabolically healthy human. Why do we think their LDL cholesterol is high alongside having high HDL cholesterol and low triglycerides? Well, we believe that there is a greater synthesis and secretion of triglycerides in the liver, that once hepatic glycogen levels get low enough, it activates greater whole body fatty acid turnover. You have more fat coming in and out of your fat cells, and that's because you're fueled more by fat, and because you're leaner especially, you need to mobilize more of it. And so more of the fat that's getting released is getting packaged up in the liver as triglycerides and VLDL. And VLDL is a central thing we're focused and interested in because it goes back out. Mostly it's repleting fat cells, but it's also got a larger role to play in fueling oxidative tissues. Now, why that's important is that in that process of dropping off its triglyceride cargo as fatty acids to cells in the periphery, is that three things that are part of that triad come to be, which is that the VLDL gets changed into LDL, and there's more of them now. And the turnover, the dropping off of the fatty acids means triglycerides go down. Which seems unintuitive because if I'm saying you're powered more by triglycerides, you'd think they would go up, but they're turning over faster. So the rate of turnover is faster, and that's why they go down. But coupled with the triglycerides going down, which we see over and over again in both physiology and pathophysiology, is that as triglycerides go down, typically HDL goes up. But in the case of lean mass hyperresponders, it goes way, way, way up, higher levels than you typically see in the general populace. So what does that mean for HDL particles? So HDL cholesterol goes up, but HDL cholesterol is the cargo on those HDL particles. Okay, so here we slow down a moment. What's fascinating is that it's not too uncommon. It's not super common, but it's not uncommon for lean mass hyperresponders to have high HDL cholesterol, lower HDL particle count, right? Now, where this gets interesting is we don't know how much there's a greater amount of recycling of those cholesterol esters, that's the cholesterol that's on board, those HDL particles, back to the liver because of that synthesis cycle having been increased, right? Now, there's some conflicting things in the literature, and I can't say that we have that totally worked out yet, but I can say that I have unique experience with a population with lean mass hyperresponders, specifically who might have a marginally lower HDL particle count and a wide spectrum of blood work. And I don't tend to see things associated with greater toxicity in general. It's not always the case, but that by itself doesn't tend to be the case. Now, that said, as with metabolic syndrome being kind of the counterpart to the other side, right? So now we've got typically higher triglycerides, lower HDL. You can have higher marginal LDL cholesterol, which I would argue is more indicative of a lack of turnover and more of a traffic jam.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you also have higher proportion of small dense LDL particles. So there are some things that are the opposite, which is the lower HDL, the higher triglycerides over here on the metabolic syndrome side. But some things that kind of go in this U-shaped curve, which is If you're fat adapted over here, you have higher LDL cholesterol. But why? Why, we would argue, because there's faster delivery and more successful delivery. Over here on the metabolic syndrome side, you have higher marginal LDL cholesterol, but that's because of a failure of delivery for those triglycerides, which mess with that mechanism, that those three things I was talking about before. But also the HDL particles being lower with metabolic syndrome, particularly the, I'm going to get extra geeky here for a sec, but particularly HDL, I believe it's HDL 1 and 2, are the bigger, fluffier, if you will, HDL particles. They tend to have more HDL 3 and 4, which are the smaller, denser HDL particles in metabolic syndrome. And I believe more of them. So that might be a counterpart of the two, typically speaking, when it's over here, but I'm not actually sure. It could be in the course of infection that becomes more relevant.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's, I caught about, maybe understand about 95% of what you said. So let me just throw this at you. When you said that there's labs that don't correlate to toxicity, are you talking about the functional labs, like total urine toxins? Or are you talking about standard medical tests?
I'm speaking mainly to standard. So
okay, so they don't do a very good job of measuring toxicity. So having said that, this could be like a totally parallel theory unrelated to metabolic syndrome. So HDL particles, small HDL particles, soak up LDL particles, right?
They soak up the surface components of them.
Okay.
HDL particles pick up what the shrinking of VLDL create.
Okay. Now, LDL particles clean up toxicity. LDL particles can be toxic.
Yes, they can. Right? They can bind to pathogens themselves. They can also become. They can also be depleted of their alpha tocopherol because of how much contact they're having with reactive oxygen species.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Things like that.
Yep. So if you have a low count of small HDL particles, maybe it's because a lot of them are soaking up LDL now that they're large HDL particles, and there's a less amount of small ones because they're being used to clean toxicity. So parallel theory, parallel to the metabolic syndrome.
Well, and I want to be a good scientist and offer that it's possible that some number of lean mass hyperresponders with lower HDL particles may, in fact, if there are better tests per your recommendations, because I can get tests on any of these guys for anything, could have some toxicity that we're not checking for. What do you consider to be your go-to, panels that you would suggest for toxicity that you feel are, well validated?
Well, the one I use mostly is total tox burden from Vibrant America, urine sample.
And what are some tests that are in there?
It measures 31 chemicals, 20 mycotoxins, and I think 22 heavy metals.
One of our co-authors, Tommy Wood, very, very early on in our meeting was suggesting that perhaps the inversion pattern was endotoxin load.
Yep.
That might be the reason for
so lipopolysaccharides from gram-negative bacteria.
Right.
So I've seen people. I got a medical doctor. I set up this thing called mvxtraining.com, and it's a website that it's a paid membership, but it's for doctors only. And I have training there, and the initial training is 3 hours and 20 minutes long, right? All about MVX Plus. But over the last 10 years, I've made a bunch of ebooks and courses online, and of course my regular physical book on Amazon Kindle. But in the 10 years, I created what I call the 7-step blueprint to optimal health, which addresses all these things that fix MVX Plus. Anyways, he's part of that MVX training. So he had a very good score, like 26, let's say, MVX, total score. And then he got terribly sick. He was bedbound for 3 days, but he dragged himself to get another MVX score. And it was a total mess. He was 70. The score was 70. And he's a very healthy guy, but very sick. And his small HDL particles were totally crashed down. So it tells you that he had an infection, and it's got to be the endotoxins from the bacterial infection. It's not like he drank Roundup, causing toxicity. But I've seen this. I've seen infections cause small HDL particles drop down. Yeah. And there's overlap with the other factors of MVX. So if somebody's malnourished, they're not eating enough protein, their branched chain amino acids can be too low, and they can have poor citrate. Their citrate can be too high, or their immune system sucks because their diet's bad. Now their glycate is too high. So MVX has all these pieces, and they all work together, and you can also see them being independent. Okay, and I got to say that the reference ranges on MVX Plus are completely wrong. And I emailed LabCorp, and I know they're not going to change it, but I know the ones that are, I know the correct ranges. So,
okay, so that's also kind of interesting. So you feel is it like too generous, like the ranges that they give? Okay,
yeah.
So it's kind of like insulin.
Yeah, there's the functional lab ranges, like and then there's the standard medical lab ranges. That's true for most labs. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously. Not to pick this bone, but it's a bone worth picking. The reference range for LabCorp on fasting insulin is, I believe, 3.0 milli-IU to 24.
Oh, yeah.
24 milli-IU. Are you kidding me? I'm raising the alarm bells with any family member of mine who their insulin comes in at 10 or higher.
Oh, for sure.
I want everyone to be at 5.
Yeah.
I know that's an ask if they're not already, but like double digits, we're having a talk.
Yeah.
So 24, it drove me crazy because I did get one of my family members who's a challenge case, but got them to get their blood work done, and they came in at like 22.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, but it's not bold faced. It's fine." And the doctor said it's fine.
Oh, it's too high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
so, Dr. Kraft, right?
Yeah.
He would agree with us. Okay. So I was going to tell a story though about the clinical use of MVX Plus. So I had the gas leak. I fixed it December 7th. And then I got it activated January 6th. And you and I were on the phone for like an hour around that time. I was like, oh my God, this just happened. So then I got my blood drawn January 13th. And I got my first scores. And now remember, at the time, I was still feeling really bad. I had lung pain and heart pain, still breathing difficulty. And my score was 55. So that put me at a 20% chance of not surviving the next 5 years. And I didn't do anything for the next four weeks with supplements or diet or exercise. I kept everything the same. I just wasn't breathing in gas. And I redid MVX, and my score dropped all the way down to 31. So, and then my chance of dying in the next 5 years, 3%. And I had a conversation later with Dr. Bill Cromwell about this, and he was shocked because he thought your score would stay the same for maybe 2 years. If it did change, it might just change a little bit. No, I'm having people drop, their scores, 10, 15 points in 4 to 6 weeks. And it's dramatic. It's really cool. So then my third blood test, I had a sinus infection. And my score went from 31 up to 39. And then then I took care of that with supplements. And then my fourth score, it dropped all the way down to 26. So I'm getting better, right? Mm-hmm. Then I start taking detox supplements to get the gas out. And I can feel these old symptoms coming back because that's what happens sometimes when you're detoxing. You revisit I had the chest pain and difficulty breathing and like, oh my gosh, I feel bad. And then my score went up to 37 for 2 months in a row. So I'm just saying, like, MVX, it gives you this amazing clinical picture, and you can predict what might happen, and it'll direct you down the right path. It'll tell you whether you're doing it right or not. So it's been the best thing for clinical practice.
Okay. So one thing that I'm pretty confident is going to get brought up a lot is is detoxing.
Yeah.
So it's usually one of the most attacked
for sure
terms.
Yeah.
And I'll concede I've not gone down the rabbit hole of like what could be considered actual detoxing or not. How would you define detoxing? What do you feel is the science that best supports that it's a very real thing? Because as far as supporting things like, say, your kidneys for excretion, that just makes sense to me. But as far as how that's accomplished, what supplements could work and so forth, like what's the case to be made for that?
Well, I'll start with the supplements. There's tons of research on supplements like N-acetylcysteine and glutathione, and even like apple pectin. And then I'm going to talk about a brand or like a category of supplements called, I call them special dirt. That's the bentonite clay, zeolite, activated charcoal. I use binders. They all come from soil, and they're all a carbon chain. And the carbon chain could be flexible or it could be very solid like a filter, and it captures toxins. And you can make that carbon chain or that carbon filter a certain size to go after mercury or cadmium, depending on the size that you need. Or there's other ones that can bend, and like there's electromagnetic or nuclear forces that can make the carbon chains wrap around a toxin. And so there's clinical evidence research, there's the nutraceutical style research. There's also research in quantum physics. One of my companies that I like to use is called Cellcore. They were founded by some of the original founders, or not founders, but employees. I'm gonna say employees. Were quantum physicists. And some of the original seminars I attended through them, we're talking like, 2018, 2019, they actually had physicists on stage talking about how their carbon chains, they load them up with hydrogen and oxygen. And here's why. And we're changing the pH, and it becomes more active, more powerful. And here's how it grabs, this toxin. So we got clinical evidence, we got the nutraceutical, nutritional, detoxing evidence, we got the quantum physics going on about that. So
the major mechanism proposed is that these are effectively methods of binding.
Right. There's two mechanisms. One is the binders go in and grab and then secure it, and then your body gets rid of that. And like it'll stay in your body like 12 to 18 hours. So you take the pill, you can feel toxic at the 12-hour mark, and then you go to the bathroom at the 18-hour mark, and now you feel like Superman. And that's absolutely how I felt when I started taking my initial binders to get rid of the mold. It was amazing, and I felt terrible. So I take 2 pills at night, wake up in the morning with terrible heart pain, because I felt like, oh, that's the toxins coming out. And then at 1 o'clock, I'd go to the bathroom, and I felt like Superman. Like I wanted to jump off the toilet, like, oh my God, I feel so much better. So I took 2 pills a day, but I took 1 in the morning and 1 at night instead of 2 at night. So I could spread out the detox reactions, 24 hours a day. So I took 2 pills a day for 7 years. And I monitored with my urine samples. I also did antibodies testing with blood for mold, and the urine would test the mycotoxins. And I just kept testing. And initially I got worse. The test showed worse, but yeah, it was,
so you could
actually coming out.
You could actually see it in the urinalysis.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And you could do this with chemicals. You can do this now with plastic. You can do this with heavy metals. And that's part of, my whole thing about holistic healthcare is that, medicine, heart attacks, plaquing, cardiovascular disease. There's a guy, Dr. Muhammad Allo, right? Not really a fan of him. He knows it. He blocked me on TikTok, but whatever. But I saw him. He was with Dr. Tro, Low Carb MD, and Dr. Allo was talking about only 30% of people with heart disease have metabolic syndrome. And he goes, depending on the study, it could be 20%, or there's one study showing only 9% have type 2 diabetes. So really, let's say it's 30% of people with heart disease have metabolic syndrome. What about the other 70%? Dr. Allo says it just happens. They just get heart attacks. And the answer is no, it's toxicity and infection. Now, it's not just me saying that. The American Heart Association said in June of 2023, you have to look for toxins. And there's a study, and it's like an editorial / study. They're talking about cadmium and mercury and tin and lead. And they're telling cardiologists, look for toxins and use EDTA, which is, detox medication, IV, to get the toxins out, because this is a major player for heart disease. And now the American Heart Association is also saying, look for infections. So this is what the founders of medicine said in the 30s, toxins, infections, bad diet. It's coming back. Thankfully, it's coming back. And it's not just me, because it's also the American Heart Association saying it.
So you would say there's probably a fairly sizable proportion of those that are suffering heart attacks that actually the major component of origin is infection.
Yes, 100%. And another subset, it's a major proportion, is toxicity. And that's my story, because I had mold that sent me to the cardiologist twice and got 4 EKGs. I went to urgent care twice in 2016. And then 2024, gas leak, ER, heart. It's all heart, but it was toxicity, right? And you could say mold is either mycotoxins or infection. But there's also nanobacteria. You've heard of that, right? Yeah. That was discovered 30 years ago. Well, the American Heart Association is saying, well, there's this new thing. It's called infections causing heart attacks. It's like, no, it's not new. It's at least 30 years old. It's probably 90 years old. It's probably, so,
I think that has been, I think the only place of disagreement might be how worthy it is of attention because of how much of a proportion it's affecting. So probably you could go to a cardiologist today and say, hey, can infection ultimately bring about, a cardiovascular event? And my guess is almost all of them would say, yeah, but probably the vast majority would say, but it's rare.
Right, because they're not looking for it.
Right, and you would say, you guys are underestimating how common it is.
Right.
Maybe it's not the most common scenario by which you're going to have a cardiovascular event, but it's so common, it's common enough that you should be looking for these two other things.
Well, they'll run a CBC and they'll look for neutrophils and they'll be like, oh, it's fine. Or this is off, but no, but if you run, there's a panel I run called Cyrex or Ray12, which measures, is it maybe 28 different organisms, including Lyme organisms, viruses, mold, candidas in there, parasites are in there. It's an amazing, it's an amazing panel. So you run that, and then you can have like 3 things that are high and 5 things that are moderate, and the rest are normal. Well, you got to fix that stuff up, right? It doesn't matter. And this is not something that hospitals would ever run. This is where the functional doctors come in. So that's why cardiologists will miss major infections, and they're never looking for parasites, by the way, and they're never looking for mold, right?
Yeah, I think the concept of something being super rare, and I'm wanting to be generous. There's a degree with which we're all sort of hyper focused on our own areas of interest until we don't have much choice but to get, for it to veer off. This, by the way, is a place where I kind of get somewhat optimistic with where AI might take us.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot to feel both ways about AI, but with regard to medicine, particularly in I think I've already seen some material from you that would agree with what I'm about to say. I think that we're in a situation where healthcare is become overly specialized.
Right. Because
of that, if something is a smaller proportion but still a relevant one, such as, cardio-related toxicity, right? It's probably not a big business there.
Environmental cardiology is a thing.
Yeah, environmental cardiology, but it's probably not something, a child right now is going, I want to go into medicine. I want to do something related to hearts. They're probably going to become a cardiothoracic surgeon, or they're going to become a preventive cardiologist or something like that. That's what they hear about the most. And the specialization pathways that each of these things land in, they're so specialized that it kind of creates a little bit of a blinder towards these less common, but still common enough to be relevant outcomes. Right.
So let me jump in. So with the carnivore diet, there's a lot of cases of people having autoimmune conditions being reversed, right? And then with the keto diet, a lot of psychiatric problems going away. Right. So that tells me with the carnivore diet, it's like the carnivore diet with autoimmune diseases, it's building up the amino acids, it's helping their immune system. That's why it's really good for autoimmune conditions, right? And then the keto diet with the high amounts of fat and the ketones, really good for feeding the brain. So what's in the brain? What's causing the brain to be so off and causing psychiatric issues? There might be an infection in there. It might be a toxicity causing inflammation. So the keto diet is the absolute best anti-inflammatory diet of all the diets, right? So these diets are very beneficial, and look deeper. Look for the infections, look for the toxins. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Well, I like the carnivore diet as a multiple removal diet because beyond what it's giving you, what is getting taken away by going on it. And I'm not the wholesale subscriber that, plants are what's successfully killing us necessarily. But are there people, a large proportion of the population, that have allergic reactions to various things, to oxalates, to protease inhibitors, or, and not even necessarily allergic reactions, but do they have intolerances, right?
Right.
Such that when they remove them all,
right,
categorically, they tend to find relief. Sure. Is it possible that it's not all plants, that it's some plants? Sure. And that it's just a matter of finding out what it is that's fine. But the whole purpose of a multiple removal diet, as I tell my family and friends who I try to talk them into trying something like this, is to at least learn whether that's the category of something that's affecting you.
That's a good point.
So I always pitch it to this way. I say, don't treat this as though this is something I'm telling you to be on for the rest of your life. Just like with the most multiple removal diet protocols, it's an information gathering exercise.
Yeah.
At least rule in or rule out that something about your diet is having the impact that you're struggling with right now.
Right.
But
and I do think a lot of people are deficient in amino acids. Again, MVX tells me, it shows this patient is not eating enough meat. So I had a patient come in this spring as a new patient. Now, in the fall of last year, she had E. coli. So chronic diarrhea. She lost a lot of weight. She was on IV antibiotics for a long time. It saved her life. And when she came to me this spring, she kept saying, I have residual, I'm sorry, yeah, C. diff. Did I say C. diff? It was C. diff. Mm-hmm. And so she says to me this spring, I have residual C. diff, residual C. diff. She kept saying it. Now, she looked a little pale. Her hair was falling out. She looked weak. She was complaining about feeling weak. We ran MVX. Her glycate was normal, but her branched chain amino acids were low. And I said, you don't have C. diff. You don't have infection inflammation. You're malnourished. And she's arguing with me on this. I said, look at the numbers. You don't have enough amino acids. And her brother was in the room with us. They're both in their 60s, right? Brother-sister relationship. And I said, you're malnourished. And he goes, yeah, you don't eat enough meat and you're eating sugar every day. So that, like, boom, hit her in the head, right? Just like, boom, like, yeah, she's changed her diet. And in two months, she's 90% better. And her MVX scores all improved. Of course, her branched chain amino acids came up. So there's certainly, and I've seen this over and over again, people are deficient in amino acids.
Yes.
Now I'll say to people, I'll say, I had a new patient this spring again, and I looked at her amino acids, they were low. And I'm like, okay, maybe she's vegetarian, she's eating junk food, or she's not digesting protein very well. So I got her on the phone. I said, are you a vegetarian? And just flat out like that. She goes, no, I'm on the carnivore diet for 2 years. I said, oh, do you have any trouble digesting food? She goes, yeah, every time I eat food, my stomach hurts. Well, what's that? It's a B1 deficiency. So I put her on B1. I put her on a few other supplements for the mitochondria because her citrate was high. She redid MVX in 10 days, and her score dropped. I think it was like 14 points because I fixed her digestion with B1 and the right supplements. So again, another case of MVX telling us, look, it's digestion or it's protein or something like that.
I definitely think all ways by which you can absorb nutrients have to be understood. So
yeah,
for sure. I don't know B1 that well. That didn't make it into my my required reading before we had this conversation. But I am interested. I'm interested in how all of these different things can be part of the components for which you can pick up and absorb more of these.
Well, so B1 makes the stomach churn. It makes the peristalsis of the intestines work. It makes the gallbladder squeeze and shoot bile into the small intestine. B1's needed to make hydrochloric acid for the stomach. I mean, the vagus nerve, comes from the brainstem. It goes to all the organs. That's part of the nervous system, and the nervous system can be deficient in B1, causing all these digestive problems, all these, psychiatric issues, deep nervous system conditions, lack of sweating, too much sweating, lack of appetite, too much appetite. When I had the gas leak, there were 3 days I had no appetite. I actually felt full. A B1 deficiency makes you feel full. So 2 mornings in a row, I made breakfast and I looked at it and I didn't even eat it. I couldn't eat it. I lost like 6 or 7 pounds in like that week. And then for dinner, one dinner I made, I looked at it, couldn't even eat it. That's cachexia. Cachexia is an end stage symptom when people are dying. They don't have any appetite. They eat food, they can't digest it. It's all B1 deficiency. So of these 70 symptoms that I know of B1 deficiency, coma, that's an end stage symptom of B1 deficiency. And there's a bunch just slipping my mind. I have it all in my laptop. That's why I brought my laptop. So you can have minor symptoms like, oh, why am I sweating excessively? Or I get in the sauna and I can't sweat. That could be a B1 deficiency, all the way down to I'm in bed, I'm near death, B1 deficiency. And that's the thing. That's one of the problems with, living in these human bodies, right? I think a major problem is like our windpipe and our food pipe are too close to each other. So people choke, right? That's a genetic thing. Everybody's got it. And that's a problem. Another problem is our body's only stores 30 milligrams of B1, and it's really hard to get enough in the diet. Like I said, it's everywhere, but it's not in a lot of quantity in the foods. But then we have high stress, we have alcohol, coffee, tea, high carb diet, parasites, mold, all that stuff depletes B1. So it's easy to go deficient. It's hard to bring it back up. Thank God we got these pills. Thank God we got the benfotiamine and the TTFD pills to bring up our B1 stores. And they were made in Japan in the 1960s because they have a lot of beriberi from eating white rice.
Well, that's part of again, and this is me making some assumptions as an engineer. Yeah. I'm assuming evolution is conserving a lot based on what the problems were throughout that span of time. So did we have a problem with, say, starvation? Oh, we did. So we developed subcutaneous fat. We actually helped get ourselves through winters a lot better. And to the extent to where we could do things like cross the land bridge and all of that sort of thing. But if there's a lack of vitamin storage, the first place I'm naturally jumping to is, well, that wasn't a big problem before. Now It's like a bigger problem now, either because we have less of it in our diet or because we've created some version of disease state that requires more of it to deal with that disease state. That's like my default position.
You're right.
On almost everything, right? So we're fortunate enough to figure out where these deficiencies came from when going back to the early 19 teens and so forth, when we were figuring out people being hospitalized and trying to give them a diet and then finding out, oh, these are what vitamins are, because if we don't have this particular thing that's in the foodstuffs that we're giving them, they die of this disease. It manifests this way. Here is what those are, right? But then we creatively come up with our own new food environment that becomes deficient in other ways and creates diseases that create other forms of deficiencies.
Right.
That's a pretty complex problem we created for ourselves.
Yeah.
So part of things like keto, carnivore, in my mind, this is actually one of my favorite stories. While I was in the process of doing these experiments with different diets, back when I had a lot more bandwidth, I tried to formulate a whole food plant-based diet. Now,
I remember this.
Full disclosure, I'm a picky eater, so I'm not the best at it. If I was more of a foodie and if I was more into cooking, I think I could pull it off. If I could make a processed plant food diet such that I would have, like, say, mock meats and protein shakes, I think I could do it, and relatively easily. But I also didn't want to get criticized if I didn't end up liking it, that the only reason I didn't like it was because it wasn't whole food plant-based. It wasn't the real thing, right? Or if my numbers didn't turn out that well. So I really I really put in a good college try at trying to find something that I thought I would find palatable. Again, acknowledging I'm a picky eater. Simple to make, easy to prepare, yet nutritionally complete. And I could hit a lot of the vitamins, but I was having a heck of a time with the amino acids. I learned a lot. I learned the most at that time about amino acids and protein folding and all of that. And I realized then, it was like a big light bulb moment for me, was I get why it's just harder on a plant-based diet that doesn't make use of things like, protein shakes. Why it's so hard. It's because plants, of course, are using a different proportion of amino acids because they're making different proportions of proteins and different kinds of proteins to support that. Whereas the animal kingdom is making more of the proteins that we ourselves are using and in the same comparable quantities of usage for amino acids. That's why a 9-ounce steak covers it all for the day. All the amino acids, right? Yeah. Like when I was looking at that, I was just sitting there, I was thinking, what if I did plant-based but with the steak? Would that be? No, of course that wouldn't be accepted. So no, the only way that I could really do it is with a processed like pea protein shake. And let me reemphasize one more time in case I don't do it enough. I have friends who are on plant-based diets, and if they're on it, they can do well. I've seen their blood work. I know some that can pull it off, but they usually they're above the average on hitting their nutritional targets, making sure they get enough B12. That's a huge thing. Anybody who's seriously considering plant-based, they need to know that they've got to get the B12. Vitamin D, same thing. And hitting those amino acids.
Right.
You can easily, I think a lot of the issues that you see for folks who've been on plant-based diet for a long time, if they're not being mindful of these, they can end up with these deficiencies and it can be a big problem.
But I think even just as standard American, if they run MVX, it'll show you if you're deficient in the amino acids.
And that might be true.
For $20, right?
You said it's 3 amino acids that tracks.
The branch chain, valine, leucine, isoleucine. And then, okay, so I have my own standard range of what those numbers should be on MVX. So if they're too low, I got to fix the patient's digestion or make sure they're eating enough protein, right? But if they're too high, that's a different scenario. And that's metabolic syndrome. And that's like, insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So let me share this story. So I have a patient, when he was a child, his dad owned the bingo hall, and he would give his children the keys to the candy store at the bingo hall. So that was their favorite pastime, was to eat candy. So he's been type 2 diabetic for 25 years. And I started seeing him 2 years ago. And I put him on the keto diet. And his glucose was 250, 280 and higher. And it came down to like 130, but it didn't sustain. It came back up, which is what Virta Health is showing after 5 years. You know that. So you know that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't caught up with them recently.
Right. But the point is, it's like all the diets work temporarily for type 2 diabetes. Veganism will not work after a year and a half. The keto diet will not work after 5 years. What are we missing? B1. I'm going to pound my fist on the table. It's virtually, B1, virtually. So with this guy, I was like, okay, keto didn't work. What are we missing? Maybe have an infection. So he got the cone beam to look for an infection in his jaw. Otherwise, he didn't have anything like that. And that's when I found out about B1. So I said, okay, at the next visit, I was like, you're going to take benfotiamine. You're going to take 1,000 milligrams a day. Start, and we'll see how it goes. 1 year later, swear to God, his blood glucose is 80 to 120. It's because of the B1. So this happening with another patient, type 2 diabetic for a couple, 3 decades, same thing. And then I have a third guy, his glucose is 500-600, crazy high, and he's not taking insulin. He refuses insulin, which is ridiculous, but he's not doing it. And I put him on B1, it's not helping, right? So it's going to work for some people, not for others. But anyways, you can see this with MVX because the branched chain amino acids will be too high. Now, when that happens, it's because the body's not digesting protein very well. Okay, and then you get the high amino acids in the blood. We can also assume that it's not digesting carbohydrates or fats or alcohol, right? The whole digestive system is off. So you take B1, it fixes a lot of the digestion. Maybe you need some gallbladder flushing. Maybe you need some extra enzymes for the pancreas. But B1 is like the flagship supplement to start. So, but in the meantime, if you have these branching amino acids that are high, it's saying it can't digest protein, but those BCAAs, when they're high, that prevents the liver from defatting. Okay, it's like a biochemical mechanism where now you have a fatty liver, insulin resistance, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, hypoglycemia, the whole metabolic syndrome being caused by high branched-chain amino acids in the blood. So it's a whole new mechanism regarding type 2 diabetes. High branched-chain amino acids due to lack of digestion function due to B1 deficiency. B1 deficiency being caused by high-calorie malnutrition junk food. So it's still the same cause, bad diet, but there's this mechanism there. You with me on that?
Yeah.
And there's research on that. I'm just not making this up. There's research behind that.
Let's circle back to Verta real quick.
Yeah.
My understanding is like the average BMI for most participants when they started off was something like 45 or 50, something in that neighborhood. I have some challenge cases in my family that they're tough, and I'm doing my best to work with them. You know, you meet them where they're at, right? One of the comparisons that I make for those who are really struggling with lifestyle that they have adapted to, you know, via various reasons, versus those that have some kind of super debilitating chronic illness such as epilepsy, that a keto actually literally is just a lifeline for them, is there's more in the second category that I find are on ketogenic diets 4 or 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And they're doing fine.
Yeah, that's good.
But that's because they're not like that first category,
right,
and that they can't slip.
Yeah.
But even in the second category, I see experiments where they try to liberalize now and then, right? Because food is so powerful. It's so... Coming into the space, I underestimated just how big of a deal food really truly is, and how much of an emotional connection it is, how ostracizing it is to be on a diet that you feel separates you from your family and friends and so forth, right? And so I say this with love and compassion, genuinely. But I'm kind of like House MD when it comes to diet, where he says everybody lies, right? I want to believe in metabolic ward studies, but I would want to get a bunch of free living people to live there for a decade on a given diet, which is totally unrealistic and insanely expensive, to truly know how much we can keep them on a given lifestyle that's being prescribed. You know, I joke about this online a lot. I like to call it, you know, Dave's Keto Island. I wish there was like an island you could go to, and it's got a 10-hour a day, all you can eat keto buffet. All the salmon and eggs and steak, but no fat bombs or anything that's like hyper refined versions of keto. No, it's just, you know, it's just real food keto.
Yeah.
Right. And I would want to see how many people would find that keto stopped working for them once we had them there for a while, right? To better assess exactly what you're describing. And it could be it's something as simple as B1, that there just isn't enough B1 in that buffet.
Right.
Right.
So what I see as a clinician, again, only diet and supplements for 26 years with my patients. What I see is that there are conditions where it drives people to eat bad food. Candida in the body makes people crave sugar. Toxins, like heavy metals, chemicals, make people feel terrible, and they eat comfort food because they think they're dying. So when I had the gas leak, I was not so much on the carnivore diet because I didn't know why I was sick. And here I am going to the ER, think I'm having heart attacks, but I don't have clogged arteries. So my diet was a bit off. But I'm like, I love the carnivore diet, right? I changed because the gas leak changed me. And with the mold, same thing with the mold. When I figured out the mold and I moved out of that office in 2018, I started the carnivore diet at the end of 2018. And 2019 was one of my greatest years. Hardcore carnivore. I'm telling you, 2 pounds of meat a day and I had 5 servings of fruit 1 day per month, like 5 oranges or 5 apples, 1 day a month. I had 5 iceberg lettuce heads and 5 bags of granola the whole year. Otherwise, it was all meat. I put on 10 pounds. I was going to the gym twice a week. I loved it. And then 2020, COVID, lockdowns, all that stuff happened. And so my diet changed because of that.
But see, that's such a perfect example, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a perfect example.
Yeah.
It happened all over the world. A bunch of people who had been on their best life diet for X amount of time. Yeah. I was one of them. Yeah. I found myself liberalizing my diet. I was still low carb, but not keto. And I kept thinking about it in terms of how everyone else was, which is this was a means of self-soothing. And and frankly, it is the most accepted version of that, right? So we, our grandfathers did not have the kinds of foods that exist today, which could be so easily compared to actual drugs. Right. You did not have things like the soda fountain was like a treat. You had to like go there, you had to get it made, and the proportion of your income was much larger than what it is today. Now you can get soda for nothing, but in Mexico it's cheaper than water. Yeah. Right. And it makes it super easy to use these foods as self-soothing, as a way to cope. And I acknowledge I've done this before in the podcast before. I myself can stress eat. I myself, when under a lot of stress, is there a risk that I'll liberalize my diet more? Yeah, I have my own methods. I stay away I try to like avoid any area of, town for which things that I would like to eat that I know are bad for me around. But I wish I could say I'm so disciplined that I'm only eating the best diet that I possibly can. It's just not true. Right.
So during this whole time though, my diet's since carnivore, my diet's been 90 to 95% calories from meat, right? So my cheat would be during COVID, my governor shut down my business for 6 weeks. I was so pissed off. This is going to sound ridiculous, but that's how people's minds work sometimes, right?
Right.
I went to Taco Bell. I got a nachos Bel Grande. It was like this small, so stupid small. And some tacos, spent $18. And then I got a Blizzard at Colders or whatever. Like, come on, Otherwise, that was my cheats right there. But having said all that, I'm a big fan of the high satiety diet, Dr. Ted Naiman, right? Mm-hmm. So high protein, low carb, and low fat. And I think that was the diet prior to, the 1970s when there's so much junk food, now, but back then there wasn't. It was a high protein diet. So if I could wave a magic wand and give everybody a really good basic diet, it would be that. It'd be meat and people love their plants. Some people love their plants. Just pick the ones that are high protein with the high fiber, low carb, and low fat.
I think if you start with the protein energy diet as described, if you're like from childhood, you're set. I think you and I probably agree. I think a lot of people sitting in that chair have agreed with me. There could be a lot of argument as to how we get to the state of things like severe insulin resistance. There might be a lot of debate, seed oils, which we haven't chatted about yet, things along those lines. But at the point where there's the breaking, where you actually have some level of dysfunctional beta cells in your pancreas or something like that, now the problem is the form of carbohydrates that you're likely getting is less and less relevant the more insulin resistant you are. And therefore, it becomes more of a challenge depending on how bad that insulin resistance is. I know there's some people who are going to debate with me, and I've got some coming guests who probably I'll have that debate with, who will take the position that, look, insulin resistance is solved by just, losing enough weight, that you're not past your personal fat threshold. And I think there's a sliding scale there. I think that's true for someone like me mostly.
Yeah.
But when I say mostly, that means I can be on a low carb diet and get away with having buns on my burgers or having pizzas now and then, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Could I ever go back to like a high carb diet? No, I don't think so, because I think that I could test my fasting insulin in the morning. I'm going to find it's high because I think I'm that insulin resistant. I'm better though than my dad, who got to the ketogenic diet at age 65, and it's done wonders for him, but doesn't take much for him at all.
Yeah.
He loves strawberries. So he tries his best to just get like a few strawberries in a day, right? And they're fibrous, right? Like relative to refined carbohydrates. And it'll spike up his glucose coming into the night and into the morning.
But that's where I'm looking at infections and toxins. He's got something going on right there. So I heard, and I looked it up later, I couldn't find it, but somebody told me the World Health Organization acknowledges that there are cases of type 1 diabetes in children caused by parasites. I mean, it's logical that could be true, but I've never found that report or that study. But for a long time, I worked with that. And I did have a patient, and she was under the age of 10, and her glucose was spiking up 160 and 200. And her mom's like, we're afraid she's gonna have type 1 diabetes or, early type 2 diabetes. I found a parasite. She pooped out a parasite, and it normalized her blood glucose. So again, this is where MVX comes in, because it's going to expose toxins and infections that nobody looks for. Run this $20 test and let it direct you down the right path. You got to know the right numbers though. But these are things that I figured out because I don't take insurance for 20 years. I get patients paying me cash. Nobody wants to spend thousands of dollars with me, and they still have medical insurance. Right? They come to me because they need to, because their doctors aren't giving them answers, because their doctors aren't looking for the infections and toxins and, of course, the diet that are causing their complex chronic illness. Right?
Well, you and so many others that are taking this concierge route is exactly where Own Your Labs is focused. Yeah. So the part of why I like our new platform is we now have it to where there's basically an advisor portal. And advisors you just get a QR code and you can show it to, a client, and they can just take the QR code and it's got the blood work already set up that you set up.
Yeah.
Things like that make it so it's turnkey, because there's just so many people like you who are just wanting to get entirely outside the system, not the system, not outside in the way that it's getting outside of the appropriate rules, if you will, of proper care, but rather outside of these like enormous compliance costs, structure, all of the bureaucracy. It's become so, we've never had this much of an exodus of doctors.
Right.
Of doctors not wanting to practice medicine anymore.
Right. So let me share this. So a couple weeks ago, I met Peter McCullough. You know him. He's speaking out about the COVID vaccine. And I told him about MVX Plus. And he made a comment. He goes, in order for a lab to go mainstream, there has to be about 800 studies on that. Well, right now we have 18 or 19. And it'll probably never go mainstream in our lifetime, to be honest. But these are, and there's all these other functional labs that are really, really good, but they have, let's say 100 studies on these labs. And so that's why people are leaving medical care, because the labs are old. The CBCs and stuff like that, like they're just old, and they're good, they're valid. But now we have new technology, we have new machines, we have new, blood tests, but they're not being incorporated because they don't have 800 studies to back them up. So that's why there's a whole new industry called functional medicine, right? Alternative medicine, integrative medicine. And I see MDs online complaining about it. You functional doctors, you're, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, keep complaining.
Well, that's the other part. I don't want to sound like I'm just totally pitching Own Your Labs, but as you know, that's the other piece, is that we're capturing data. We incentivize people to submit their data anonymously. So we pick up a little bit of demographic information, and we want to turn that around without charge. And so things like if people are getting MVX and they check that box and get the citizen science discount, in theory, we'll eventually have a lot more accumulated data on those exact folks. Now, getting as far as to like actually have registry, okay, now we need to get IRB, but we could turn those into studies in theory.
And I do have one study. So a PhD student reached out to me, and she's going to use MVX on a study. Now, we were talking about just get 200 carnivores and 200 vegans and just run MVX and see who's got the better scores. So there's a study using MVX like for clinical knowledge, not just longevity. So
we might be able to help with that.
And I have I can hook you up with her.
Yeah.
And I have about 14 or 15 other ideas about testing MVX.
See that I'm probably getting ahead of myself, and I want to sound like this is a huge commercial for Own Your Labs, but this is what's exciting. Go ahead. This is what's exciting about this new platform is we can do things like theoretically incentivize for those people who've already checked the box that they're interested in research topics. So if they're interested, then you could do something like literally have intermittent offers of a free test that they're already getting their blood work for with other tests, right?
Yeah.
That makes it super easy. Again, got to go through an ethics board. You got to still do the IRB and all that stuff. But it streamlines the whole process. And there could already be history from those being customary. This is the thing that I think a lot of people don't get is it's not just the functional doctors. There's a whole revolution of people who are like, yeah, I like this crowdsourced science because I can trust it a bit more. I can trust that these are a lot of people who are interested in getting this data together and more transparently. This is why when you said earlier in our conversation that they have MVX, I can't say I've objectively assessed it, but exactly what you're describing, you're interested in it. They've got a patent for it, but they're sitting on the patent.
Yeah.
What? Like, this is one of my problems with intellectual property for this exact circumstance where they say, hey, we've got this like really great thing we figured out. We're going to keep it turned off. And you're trying to find a way to determine it yourself since it's calculation based so that at least you can make use of what the original idea is, especially if there's already studies around it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. With Professional Co-op who turned it on, I asked him, how do you control LabCorp? And what he said was, well, okay, they got 10 people and he started the company 25 years ago, but LabCorp it's an international company with tens of thousands of employees. They have turnover. So they don't have one person that's like really in charge and really knows the industry. So that's how Professional Co-op Services was able to turn on a LabCorp lab. I don't know more details about that, but
well, this is a common circumstance where a business entity, the entity has ownership of a patent. The people most interested in the patent at the time, this is where turnover does become a problem. The entity has it, but the experts within the entity have since left
or
lost interest in it. Right, exactly.
Dr. Avas retired.
Yes, or they retire. And now their level of understanding for why that's meaningful and what the connection is has been severed, but the entity still has it.
Yeah.
Because they acquired it.
Yeah.
And so it just sits there collecting dust.
Right.
And it's frustrating because
So I want to bring up this point about people's individual diets. So you can run MVX and then let's say get a score and then change your diet and go full carnivore, full vegan, whatever. And then 4 weeks later, rerun MVX and see what happens. So I had people do this. I had a woman, and I wasn't even talking to her. I talked about MVX on my YouTube channel. She got inspired. She ran MVX. Her score was 60, very high. 4 weeks later, she reran it. It was 64. It got worse. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? I emailed her. What are you doing? Whatever you're doing, stop. And her reply back was, we went on vacation for 10 days and I ate bad food and I had more alcohol. We came home, celebrated our anniversary, had cake and alcohol. She made her MVX worse by eating a bad diet, right? So like this kind of negates a lot of the Harvard epidemiological nutrition surveys and NHANES and stuff like that. It kind of negates it because an individual can experiment on their own with their own diet. And I've been running it once a month because it's so cheap. So like once a month since January, I can see what's been happening with detoxing and whatever. I actually started eating Costco protein bars, high protein bars, because I'm doing like more of the high protein, low carb, low fat. And they had some kind of ingredient that was a total disaster. It felt like my muscles were made out of glue. And in July, I ran 3 miles with my nephew, July 4th, and I broke my 3-mile record. Okay, pretty good, right? I'm 53, he's 20. And then later in July, I ran 2 miles, and in those 2 miles, I broke my 1-mile record, right? Doing pretty good. I'm very happy. And then I started eating these protein bars from Costco. And in August, I couldn't even run 1.5 miles. My legs got all cramped up. My time was a disaster. And I reran MVX, and it was like 46 or something. And I know it's from that one bar. So I stopped it. And it could have been maybe some mixed nuts too. Like peanuts will have mold in them or whatever. So that could have been a thing. So I just went right back to, okay, I'm going to eat meat and vegetables. I'll stick with the high satiety diet as described by the dietdoctor.com website. And now my latest MVX, which I just got a few days ago, is lower. So now I'm improving. So this is concierge medicine you can do with yourself. Change your diet, take a supplement, detox, stop detoxing, and exercise, don't exercise, and see what happens with your MVX score. It negates these big epidemiological studies. It's revolutionary.
I'll be devil's advocate in that.
Yeah,
it's
go ahead.
Another form of epidemiology, to be fair, right? Like it's
for the individual and
right.
N of one.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm inclined. So part of my problem with a lot of these large epidemiology studies, especially when it comes to diet, is I feel that they don't. I feel that they believe, or they're how to put this delicately.
Don't be delicate.
Okay, I'm not going to be delicate. I think that they way underestimate healthy user bias. Way underestimate.
That's a good point.
And so far too often when you're looking at what the self-described diet is of the person, and then from that assessing against longevity, the issue is that if it's based on the diet advice of the day, people who are more likely to care about their health will adopt those habits and often have other habits, such as not smoking, such as getting more exercise daily, that kind of thing. And what an epidemiologist worth their salt sitting here today would say is, but that's okay. We've adjusted for that.
Right.
And yes, I don't
understand that.
Have that same head shake. My issue with these is that these are sensitivity analyses. If you say you adjusted for something, you're actually making another causal claim for each thing that you've adjusted for. You're saying, I know how much the lack of smoking caused as part of the soup. I know how much the sedentary behavior caused as part of the soup. So the calculation, I've gone ahead and added those together, and now I have this remainder left over, and I know that that's how much red meat causes cancer or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the challenge that I find. But I want to get back to bars for a sec. Protein bars in particular, because you happen to have stumbled onto something that's relevant literally in the last couple of days. Lane Norton was having a debate with somebody who follows me, and that person DM'd me that he was having this back and forth with Lane Norton. Lane Norton was talking about the importance of having things like protein bars, I think, or why he liked a particular one. And this person was saying, you can do keto on the go like this. And he showed like some Angus, 100% Angus beef patties that was from, I want to say Wendy's or something like that, with real cheese. And Lane Norton said, if you think that that's better than a protein bar, you need to get your head examined or something to that effect.
OMG. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to steel man his position as best as I can. First of all, I think he didn't just say protein bars. I think he said that or quote unquote real food. But I did push back on the protein bars. I was saying, I don't know. I think that it's me personally, I'm going to go out on a limb, say that I think if you match total consumption, if you want to match for calories, however you want to do it, I'm willing to bet the flame broiled patties that are 100% Angus beef, even though it's from a fast food place, even though the grill may add some ages to it, perhaps, even though it's probably grilled in its own juices, right? I'm going to guess that that's probably better than the shelf-stable protein bar.
Way better. Yeah.
I'm just going to go out on a limb. And it actually was a bit of a back and forth. But it really got me thinking that it is fascinating. We're at a stage where I think a lot of people would agree with him. Say, yeah, the shelf-stable food is better than that all beef Angus bar, particularly for things like saturated fat, because that was the thing he later claimed, was because there was a higher amount of saturated fat probably in the Angus bar.
Okay.
Or the Angus patty.
Angus patty, yeah. So there's two components to an argument in nutrition. Number one, quantity. Number two, quality. So if you have a protein bar and an Angus patty, they have the same amount of fat, same amount of, let's just say, total fat. Total protein is the same, and 0 carbs on both. That's a quantity discussion. And then you have the quality discussion. This has xylitol, it's got carrageenan, and it's got citric acid, and it's got these things that are preservatives and flavor enhancers. That's the stuff that really can destroy people, is these chemicals, but they're tested for safety. And toxicity is, the dose equals toxicity, right? You get these arguments that chemists come up with. But as a clinician, now I did an experiment. This is a true, legitimate experiment. I did on myself with keto ice cream. And this is at a time when Dr. Berg released the keto ice cream. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna try out. I went to my local grocery store, and over the course of 2.5 weeks, I consumed 5 pints of keto ice cream. Now I don't run often, but after that I ran, and I got a 3-mile path I always take, and my performance was a disaster. And I know it's because of the keto ice cream, and it had xylitol, and I think that was it. Now again, with these Costco bars, don't ask me why I started eating it, but I did. And I had the same exact reaction, but it didn't have xylitol in it. Which chemical is it? And what's the quantity of the chemical that caused my toxicity? That's a quality issue. The poor quality of processed food can be a disaster for somebody. And they just think, oh, it's just my arthritis. Or, oh, I just have a low mood today. Or I woke up grumpy. Or my sleep's not so good. And they go, oh, here's your drug. Here's your drug. Here's your drug. Well, it could have been the Costco bar the whole time, So these are things that a clinician, a holistic functional doctor clinician will look at, right?
Yeah. I'll go a step further too. I've been fascinated by a lot of the variations of fiber that are like newly introduced. For example, a lot of the keto buns have resistant starch. And I enjoy having buns. I like the mouthfeel for being able to do that. And if I can keep it low carb, that's great. Granted, they're going by net carbs. That's where the resistant starch comes into play. But I find resistant starch ends up, upsetting my stomach. So getting back to things like bars that are keto-like bars, I wonder how much these things in the digestive pathway are a brand new scenario and how much that plays a part. I don't know. I just have a default setting.
Right.
My default setting is, how close was the food that my ancestors were eating relative to it is now?
Right.
It doesn't mean it's automatically superior. But again, thinking more like an engineer, is the biological machinery used to these 3 things we used to consume more before,
right?
Which was protein, fat, and fibrous carbs. Things like refined carbs, that's new. Things like these preservatives, they're new. It could be a dose makes the poison. I usually function from a dose makes the poison standpoint. Yeah, it could be, though, if I had a lot of those bars, it'd be problematic. I do know if I have a lot of those keto buns, it is problematic.
Yeah.
It is. How much of that is the resistant starch, I don't know for sure. It just seems to be a common denominator. But I'm also not going to take all the time in the world to isolate each of these particular ingredients Therefore, back to my default setting.
Right.
If it's a beef patty,
Yeah.
I feel pretty good about that, and I don't have a lot of common denominator issues with that,
Yeah.
me personally.
Yeah. So in 2015, when keto got really popular around that time, I had patients making keto desserts. And I remember one patient using a lot of xylitol for some keto brownies or muffins or something, and it caused constipation. And it was already trouble for her. And I had her on some herbal laxatives, and she had to increase the dose from like 3 capsules a day to 9. And I was like, oh, you got to stop your keto desserts. Then another patient, keto desserts causing diarrhea. You know, so like, it's just, again, it's like a lot of N equals 1, you know? And you can't just say, oh, my arthritis in my thumb. It's my normal headache. It's none of that's normal. There was a video on social media. There's a medical doctor trying to make fun of integrative healthcare. And this patient or this doctor was talking about leaky gut. He goes, there's no such thing. And the woman kept saying, well, leaky gut causes headaches. He goes, well, I have headaches. And she goes, it causes fatigue. He goes, well, I have fatigue. He's normalizing symptoms. And it's like, well, dude, how about study nutrition? Stop with the drugs, you know, change diets, add some supplements, fix the headache, fix the leaky gut, you know, fix the fatigue. Drugs don't do that. You got to do the supplements and the diet. That's my call to action for drug-based doctors.
Yeah, that's, I think, a reoccurring theme here too is, again, we all have what we find to be worthy of attention that is outside of what's commonly focused on. And in the case of functional doctors, I mean, it's weird that it's even called functional health, because in my mind, if you're doing your best to just try to find any and all solutions that can resolve the problem, that's great. It is true that a lot of doctors I know will concede this up front, that their starting direction is medication or surgery. Like, those are the 2 common routes towards regaining health from their perspective. And medication is often considered comparable to supplements.
Right.
It's basically the same thing.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I'm sure there are a lot of supplements that are out there that are worse than a given medicine and so forth. But that said, getting all the way back to the beginning, when you were considering being a doctor yourself, how much nutritional training would you get? You already know the answer to that at this point. There's so little nutritional training by doctors today. But how controversial is it for me to say we're in a nutritional epidemic?
Right.
Right?
So going to chiropractic school, I got some nutrition classes, and it kind of set a foundation. Now, my real foundation, though, is outside of school. Even back then, I attended 2 seminars a month for 2 years outside of chiropractic school. And I did a lot of different topics, and I didn't have any bias. My family is either farmers or teachers. So it's like, what is this healthcare thing I'm getting into? I don't even know. So I saw a guy named Dr. Joel Wallach. Have you heard that name before? Yeah, he's like 90. He's still teaching nutrition. He's got a conglomerate of like 5 corporations. He sells supplements. And he's amazing. And after I left that seminar, I was like, okay, I want to be a chiropractor who focuses on nutrition. Okay, so the point is, there's no stopping the studying. And you know this because you study probably every day. And I'm studying almost every day because I have to. Now, having said that, I've never marketed as like the low carb doctor or the chronic fatigue specialist or the Lyme guy. I've never been a specialist in anything. Now, I've talked about lactic acidosis a lot, but that's a mechanism. And so having said that, I have received a lot of different patients with a lot of different conditions, all the way from cancer, to fatigue, or, like a toenail fungus. I've seen it all. So, and then I've been through it myself, right, with the unlucky exposures. So that's given me this perspective of like, okay, there's got to be some common denominator. That's lactic acidosis. And this idea of like, I've had people go full carnivore, full keto, and it didn't work for them. And it's like, okay, the Mediterranean diet, but they can't have certain foods. There's all these like subsets of problems with different foods. It's like, okay, so it's not always the diet. And so myself and a lot of other people, they hope that their diet will fix everything. It's like the diet is the cure. And people, will say this for different conditions, which is true, but the diet is usually not the cure. There's the other things that we've talked about already, the organisms and the toxins. So in those two subjects, it's just as expansive as the diet. So I want to bring that back.
I think it's mostly the diet for most people. That's me.
I would say that because 53% of our diet is junk food, it makes parasites thrive in the body. It prevents the liver and the kidneys from cleaning the body out. They accumulate toxins from Roundup is in the water, Roundup is in the food supply. They got mercury fillings, so yeah, they're getting more and more toxic. But yeah, you can have a heart attack because of the toxicity, right? There's a huge focus on the diet, and it's easy to talk about diet, and everybody eats food every day.
So you'd say let's just kind of to mechanistically broad base it. Yeah. You'd say toxic disposal via the diet is
toxic food, right?
Yeah,
that's a problem.
Right.
There's many causes. Plastic in the kitchen, plastic water bottles. We have nanoplastics in our body. That's been measured.
So we've got a few different categories, but let's just broadly say there's the toxins you ingest in your food.
Yes.
There's the toxins you're exposed to outside of food.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But then there's how it is you accomplish getting the toxins outside of your body.
Right.
So you already have it in your body. How do you get it back out?
Yeah.
Right. And I guess you could say, in my opinion, I don't know how much the diet's lack of support via, say, nutrient deficiency ultimately exasperates that exact problem you're describing. But do I think that a lot of what I've seen just personally, as far as disease burden being improved by diet, seemingly just by diet, that seems to be the majority of the cases that I see currently in my life. It's anecdotal, but that's why I have such a strong opinion. Like I used to be of the mind that it's like more like a 50-50. It's 50% diet, 50% exercise. People are not getting as much exercise as they used to. So that's like a big deal.
You bring up the viewpoint. So my viewpoint is I get people with complex chronic illness. So in that case, it's a third diet, a third toxins, a third organisms.
I see. So in a sense, you're conceding that there may also just be the patient population that's coming to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Might be disproportionately higher up in that chain of.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like if diabetes is the major disease of my family, so it probably skews me somewhat. But to be fair, diabetes is the major disease of Western world right now, right?
Yeah.
Again, how you get to the state of being fully insulin resistant, I think there's probably a broader amount of debate than there is for how you help resolve it, at least largely in part by reducing the thing that you have poor management of inside your body, which is glucose, right?
Right, and then put your dad on B1.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested. I'm excited to do that and revisit this with you.
Yeah.
So, real quick, what's your diet?
What's my diet?
Yeah.
So I have half a cow in my freezer in the garage, and there's roast local, organic. I got 3 farmers. And so that half cow, I'm down to the livers, like I'm running out. So I need to get another one. And in the meantime, then I go to my local grocery store and I get meat from there, and I don't feel as good. This has already happened before where I'm eating the regular meat from the store. I don't feel as good. So my diet is 90 to 95% meat. So I'll have like steaks and burger patties, ground beef, ground pork, bacon from the farmers 3 times a day. On weekends, I'll have 1 or 2 meals instead of 3. And I go to the gym, and that increases my appetite, so then I eat more meat. And then as far as plants, my girlfriend likes plants, and she lives in Chicago. I'm in Michigan, so we have like a 3.5 hour, 4 hour drive between us. So I see her like once every 3 weeks or so. So when she comes to my house, she's buying plants, salads, cucumbers, carrots. And then when she drives home, now I have these plants and I eat them. I finish them off. And then now here's another thing about fruit. So because of the gas leak and I wasn't feeling so good, I was eating more fruit. It's like a banana a day. Maybe like, let's say like 4 or 6 apples a month, grapes once every 2 months, something like that. So yeah, I'm eating more fruit now. And now when in 2019, when I was on the carnivore diet hardcore, I really needed that fruit. And I could feel like muscle function not as good because of lack of glycogen. So the fructose from the fruit would bring that up, and I could, my performance in the gym was better. So my diet, okay, to summarize, my diet is a little bit of vegetables, some fruit, maybe let's say 5 times a week, and then meat 3 times a day in sufficient quantity to make me happy and satisfied. Lots of meat. Love meat. Yeah.
So would you, like in a pie chart, how much would you say is meat overall?
Like on a dinner plate pie chart?
No, just like
calories?
on a month pie chart. Like how much, if you were talking total consumption, let's say we go by calories.
Yeah.
How many calories of your monthly diet?
It's 90%, 90 to 95%. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Which is easy to do, right? Because if you have, like one morning I had 3 burger patties for my breakfast. And like, if I could stomach a banana, which I didn't have on that day, how many calories are in 3 patties versus 1 banana, right? Like and it's like a side salad. It's like so low calorie, so like last night at the hotel, I had a 10-ounce Wagyu burger patty and a side salad. So like 90% of my calories came from that burger patty. Yeah.
Do you have periods of time where you cheat or feel that you're going to take some liberties?
The only time I have bread is if I'm at a restaurant and I have a sandwich. So that's like once a month or less. In a year, I'll have 12 or less sandwiches, and I don't eat the whole bun. It's just now let me say this. From 1999 to 2015, I was very strict on my low carb diet, and I never went above 125 grams of carbs a day. Swear to God. Swear. Now, most of the time it was less than 75. So if I cheated, I was at 75 to 125. Right. So very strict on low carb. When I started going keto in 2015, I'd go into ketosis and then out. So then I'd eat 200 grams of carbs in a day, right? Just for the fact of coming out of ketosis, Now, being on the carnivore diet, I'm so happy with that diet. I feel so good on it. I know that when I cheat, I know how I'll feel, and I just eat more meat later and I feel better, right? So
I feel like, for example, in my mind, low carb for Dave Feldman is under 100 grams of carbs. I feel like that's easy to do even with having, like, say, buns on a burger. So if I'm doing that, then I'm aware of about what that is. Where it crosses the line is if, for example, I have pizza slices from a cauliflower crust pizza. Like, that's going to probably get closer to crossing over 100. But that's super, super rare.
Yeah.
But that said, when I'm militant, like when I'm really on top of it, that's when I'm probably going to be at my lowest weight. That's usually when I have like my best sleep. That's usually, but again, that's why I'm somewhat humbled by what I've learned about diet, is even being aware of all of that. Do I still find that I'm confronting, desires and exactly what you're talking about? If I'm at a restaurant, okay, here's a great example. When I met my wife, she really likes Red Lobster. And so when we're at Red Lobster, they've got their famous biscuits, which are amazing. They're fantastic. So I keep thinking, I'll just have one while I'm here. So rarely one. It ends up being at least 2. And therefore, I always confront when I come back to a Red Lobster with her, which isn't very often, but for a special occasion, I go, I should just not have the one. I might as well just think in my mind, it's going to be 2, right?
Yeah.
That's what I continue to be fascinated by, is that even when you're doing your absolute best at keeping something a quantifiable, quote unquote, cheat, it breaks the seal, in the same way that it would be for an alcoholic. It's like, I'm just going to have this one drink.
Yeah.
It's not going to affect my sobriety.
So let me say this. Okay, let me contrast that with the vegan diet. So with the vegan diet, they're very militant, no animal products, right? With the carnivore diet, it's not so militant. It's more about just try to eat more meat and see how you feel. Maybe you'll end up with 70% meat, 30% plants, or maybe it's 90-10. And then based on what your body needs, then you can change it, right? So you're adapting. So I'm just saying, like, don't feel guilty if you're at Red Lobster and have a biscuit or something.
No, but it's not even about that. It's this fascination with how much, like how
addictive it is and how it makes you feel, the piece of bread.
Well, it's more than that. Like let's say that when you ate the thing that was against whatever diet you committed to, let's say that it truly was the joy of just that moment.
Yeah.
I think it wouldn't be a problem. But that's not how it works. You knowing that you're going to consume it is already a sense of joy. You're already getting a dopamine hit just anticipating the thing you're going to eat, just like a drug addict, right? Then you experience the thing. And that actually is so fleeting compared to the before dopamine hit and the afterward. The afterward, you have this like lovely memory of that thing you consumed, and you have this connection.
Right.
I'm blown away by that. And the reason it becomes kind of an obsessive fascination for me is because for the problem cases that are in my family, I find that I can sympathize to some degree with why you can get caught up in that. And in spite of knowing how much better your health can be when you better manage your food choices, why that's still such a huge struggle.
Right.
The problem is, and it's a huge problem, is that it's the most acceptable version of substance abuse. This age that we're in right now, right? It's like, smoking was a very acceptable substance abuse at one time. It's become less and less and less, and now it's a disgusting habit. Why is anybody smoking anymore? Is the thought process now, right? Alcohol is more acceptable relative to, say, the prohibition, but it's still, still a problem. And you do have AA, right? But when it comes to food, that's something different.
Well, there's the technology of the food manufacturers and the food scientists making their food addictive
on purpose.
So that's the high satiety diet, and they talk about that. And then the chemicals that mess with your appetite and your taste, and so they're very successful. And it's let me share this too. So there's an acknowledgement now that you had kids on iPads watching cartoons, and they're very fast with a lot of flashing lights. So you say to the kid, all right, let's go to the park, put your iPad down, and they scream and they hate it and they're rampaging around the house. But if you show them 1990s cartoons and then you say, okay, time to go to the park, they say, okay, and they put their iPad down. So that's, again, the psychology of addicting kids to video, just like the food manufacturers messing with our appetite and our hormones, their digestive hormones, making us eat more and more food. These scientists are doing a really good job of manipulating us to control our behavior.
Yeah, well, I hate to make this sound even worse, but now we don't even need scientists. We have the algorithm figuring that out on its own.
Oh, AI.
Right? So yes, you actually have, before when Hanna-Barbera was making its cartoons, it's trying to figure out how to do it as cheaply as possible, but still be entertaining enough to be on the air. And that was a whole lot of work coming up to when the thing actually aired for the human children to observe, right? And then even then there was a lot of decision making as to what the best time was to air it, right? Yeah. And there's just a whole lot of guesswork. And now the guesswork is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because the algorithm can understand more of what you're seeing and what it is about what you're seeing that's creating a longer lingering time. And yes, same thing with the appetite with regard to food. We have an appetite for entertainment. And there's this funny meme I think my wife saw, which she totally identifies with because she loves being on TikTok. She's on TikTok a lot. A movie that's 2 hours long, way too big of a commitment. Instead, I'll be on TikTok for 4 hours.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just one video after the next. And I'm usually on X. I'm not on TikTok. And I'll watch it's usually something boring, or at least that my family would consider boring, like some kind of health snippet or something to that effect. And I'm watching it, and then it gets done, it flips into the next video, and I intended to only watch that one thing.
I know.
And already I'm impressed. I'm impressed that the next thing it loaded in, their algorithm, the youngest of the algorithms, X is like one of the youngest, but it's got XAI behind it now, selected something that I can't quite get away from watching. I'm going to have to watch this piece too. I'm already looking down at the timeline going, well, it's not that long. It's only 40. I do want to see where it goes. And then it comes to the next one. And then you've got to mix in with some things that I'm wishing I didn't like watching. So we've got the true junk food of videos.
Oh yeah.
Truly, where I'm already feeling regret that I've started to watch it, but I can't seem to look away. It's that train wreck effect. It's kind of dystopian, right?
The junk food for the brain.
It really is, because right in that moment, I'm fully aware, listen, this is time I'll never get back. I'm in one of the ways I'll justify it in my brain is the same way you could do it with food, which is, well, also though this has like 18 million views, I don't want to be on the outside. I want to know what everyone's, I want to be part of the zeitgeist of everyone else to try to understand it. These to me, like my executive brain function looks down at me. It's like, that's the limbic system right there. It's the reptilian brain that's enjoying something much more cathartic and much less genuinely productive and useful in life.
Yeah.
But I don't know another way of putting this, Darren. It seems as if we're heading more toward that direction than away from it.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, I can already see with long form YouTube videos, mine are not getting the numbers that they used to get. So I'm focusing a lot on the short form videos. That's working out.
I saw that too, because you have almost 200,000 subscribers. And I was doing that. I was looking through your videos, because usually what I do when I'm researching a guest that's coming on is I'll look at what they've got recently.
Yeah.
And like other YouTubers, when you have something that says you actually do not have much clickbaity stuff out there. But when there's something that's like the missing piece with heart disease or something that's even marginally a little more clickbaity, boom, 10,000, 20,000 views or something, and you have 200,000 subscribers. But I see that all the time in the cardiovascular disease realm. A lot of nutritionists have something where they cover something like, say, B1, or they're talking about thiamine, the technical name and so forth. Very small amount of views. But you've got how many times have you seen a thumbnail that goes before and it's got plaque in the arteries, after and it's got plaque not in the arteries? Instantaneous 10x, 20x, etc. It seems to always work. And it's so common now.
Yeah,
it's such a common theme.
And so Nick Norwitz did this. It was like I ate 30 eggs for 30 days or something.
Yeah.
And here's what happened to my blood work. And he said, this is clickbaity. But it just shows you N equals 1. This is an important start for a scientific experiment. But it's kind of frustrating to kind of compete against that. And when I do a short video, people complain, well, what about, and they bring up a subject. And it's like, well, I've talked about that for 10 years on YouTube. Go to my long form videos,
right.
Start watching my long form videos. So when I have comments on my long form videos, people are smart. They say intelligent things, they have good questions and good observations. But the short form videos, it can be a disaster, especially on TikTok. And on X because they don't know me as well as the YouTube followers do.
It's tough too because good short form videos take a lot of work and they're kind of a risk.
They are, yeah.
You don't know if you put a lot of production value into a short form video, you don't know how well it'll circulate, how well you can re-reference. Like I've done short form videos where I intended them to be a bookmark that I could constantly point back to.
Yeah.
So I have one for the lipid energy model that uses empty pizza boxes. Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
It's probably one of my most popular ones. And I like it because it's a good analogy, keeps it very basic. But I put in a lot of work for that, right? I'm not sure, but I think it's something like 40,000 views, but it might even be less than that. For the amount of work put into it, I think it was worth it just only for that purpose of pointing people to it, but not for the level of work on the views returned, right? This to me was always what I ultimately wanted to do, because a lot of times I find when you're having a conversation like this, sometimes your best insights after like lots of churning pop.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of times I see, with Joe Rogan or other of these long form podcasts, a segment presents itself and works because they pretty much got through the topic that needed to be discussed. And that's why I like that. A lot of times you're kind of in the groove and you're sort of doing the production work on your own without being aware of it. But the other thing is this is more fun.
Yeah.
I like having just real conversations.
Yeah. During college, I realized I got a lot of value. I loved going to classes and watching the professor, and especially when they're not teaching, the way they interacted with a patient or the way that they thought through a process or their thoughts, right? If they vocalize their thoughts, and it was super valuable for me to see that. Of course, getting the data was good, but it's like this, once you're, not focused on the data you're supposed to present, the other things that are happening. Yeah. I love that stuff. Yeah.
The other time that I feel like works out really well is when I'm having to present. I find my sharpest learning brain activates when I have to present what I thought I already knew really well. I'm sure you experience this.
Yeah.
Like everybody I know experiences this. It's like, okay, I'm going to present. All right, I have only a week left. I need to get these slides together. And as I'm getting the slides together, I want to make sure all my references are correct. And then I get lost in between 2 to 8 rabbit holes where I'm like, actually, okay. And it only happens in like that last week before the presentation. I wish I could activate it every day and just turn the knob and be like, okay, I want to be at the level that I normally am, at the urgency that I have for making a presentation. But no, usually when it's time for me to do a big presentation is when I somehow hit these peaks. And it's not worth me doing a presentation each week. But for those times where it happens, it's great.
Yeah. So I set up in my office for education for people who have already purchased. This is not like a marketing thing. It's education on what I call the 7-step blueprint to optimal health. This is my 7 steps that I figured out fix most cases of complex chronic illness. And then MVX totally validates it 100%. I've been teaching for 3.5 years. Each of the 7 steps has 3 mini subjects. So like twice a month, I'm on video and some people come live. And it's a small audience, like 25 people, 20 people total. And I'm going through the data. And so in that time, I'm more like freelancing. What's the term? Free thinking. And I can like, I'm going to show you the study and here's this graphic and stuff like that. So then when I do a big presentation, I have all that experience behind me. So 3 weeks ago, I spoke in front of 80 medical doctors on stage at the International College of Integrative Medicine. And it was an hour long. And it was like, my brain is like on. I'm telling you what. Afterwards, I sold 40 books. I did a book signing. So half the people bought my book. But it's like the highlight of my career. And I've given lectures before, and that was the highlight of my career. Like every single time. Anyways, it's nice to have a really good functioning brain. I'll tell you that. Yeah. Thank God for the, 3-egg omelet with bacon and sausage at the hotel before I get up on stage, Yeah.
Yeah, that's another when not being as good with my diet, I mean, I absolutely can tell the difference. I did this experiment where, and it was, I want to say I did it last year, and it's where I actually went on a standard American diet first to prove that my cholesterol would tank, which I knew it would, and then went to a plant-based diet where I knew it would double. And so the point I was making, which absolutely was clickbaity, and I was saying the same thing as Nick Norwitz, because we both basically ended up doing companion versions of the same experiment, was having this diet loaded up with saturated fat and meat could still be very low based on the principles of the lipid energy model, because my carbohydrates are higher, my hepatic glycogen stores would be high, therefore my LDL would be low. And indeed, I dropped it below 100. And then going on the plant-based diet, but also being hypocaloric, to be fair. It was plant-based keto. So I went back towards fat adaptation, and then it went way back up again. But while I was doing that standard American diet for 2 weeks, I got to eat all the foods I used to eat before I went on the ketogenic diet, except for what I consider to be the hyper problem foods, which I don't want to break the seal on, like fries. I treat fries like an alcoholic would treat alcohol. I'm just never going to consume it again. But I ate pizza, I had biscuits and gravy, I had nachos. I used to eat nachos like crazy. And I was fascinated by how much it wasn't quite as good as I remembered it, but still had a kind of groove to it, in that once I was doing it, it became easy to just fall into that behavior.
Yeah.
But it absolutely did impact my focus, my concentration, and impacted my sleep, impacted my bathroom visits, right?
Yeah.
I say this from time to time, but it's really worth the emphasis. One of the advantages of doing any kind of dietary experiment is if you are the one executing when it starts, you have that catalyst checkpoint. Because most of the time when somebody falls off the diet, it's because it's around some stressor or some special event or family's in town. So it's hard for them to gauge how much their mood or other things changed due to the diet only versus this event that is the reason they fell off the diet. So I think a lot of times they ascribe the event to the terribleness that they feel, not realizing how much the diet was a component.
Yeah.
So literally planning a diet where I'm going to go off my diet, planning it to start at a certain time, allowed me to revisit how bad that was for me, for my brain, and for my behavior and my functionality, and how coming back off of it could snap it back.
Yeah. So for about 8 years, I worked for a nutritional training, clinical training company. And I taught weekend seminars. So all day Saturday and then Sunday morning. And it was a very physical job because I was doing the muscle testing, biofeedback on everybody. So anyway, so I would arrive at the hotel Friday night, always had a steak. Saturday morning, at the hotel breakfast buffet, eggs, bacon, sausage. And I did this 75 weekends over the course of 8 years. It took me about 25 weekends to finally get it down. Like, I just need meat. Okay. And now Saturday lunch was a salad with steak on top. Saturday dinner, steak. Sunday morning, same thing. And I started to experiment. So let's say Saturday morning, I added one of those little cups of yogurt. I could tell my performance was a little bit less for that day. Just adding one little cup of yogurt. And if I had like half a slice of toast or whatever, same thing. It was pretty wild. Like just adding that little bit of extra carbohydrate or whatever the food was, messing up my brain function, not being totally on track with my thoughts. Yeah, you can getting really specific there. Yeah.
Let's chat about seed oils.
Okay, let's do it.
First, one of my earliest memories of jumping onto this diet and just looking around YouTube was your video where you were giving some seminar to, I think, a bunch of people in a room. And you had they didn't have the labels. I think you had just the containers without the labels, or maybe you had it as a slide. But you were saying, yeah, these just throw them in the garbage, or give them to your worst enemy.
Yeah, that
that's
was
what
like,
I remember you saying.
That was one of my first 3 videos ever made.
Yeah,
I remember
and
that.
that one stuck in my mind, and that was early in before I understood, as well as I do now, the difference between saturated fats to poly, and why that's relevant towards liquid at room temperature, and starting to understand a bit more on how they're manufactured. However, I'll concede I myself take more of a dose makes the poison standpoint. Like if I'm out and I'm eating and I have ranch dressing, I'm fully aware that that's some mixture of canola and soy or something like that. I know that a lot of my food is going to be fried in some version of seed oils and so forth. So I'm not a purist by any means. But that said, is there a lot of seed oils in the modern American diet? Sure. How much do you think is that relevant towards the health outcome?
Okay, so that's a big question. And when I got into TikTok, there's a new breed of video creators in the medical field. And they started showing how seed oils are really good for the heart and they don't cause inflammation. And I couldn't believe it, right? And I still have a hard time believing that. But then I went through the research and I was figuring out like, well, don't seed oils do, they increase oxidation or they damage DNA or they, these things. I just started searching these terms and I found some articles, about 15 of them. And my argument was, okay, if you're showing that seed oils do not raise inflammation and they do not cause heart disease, then what about these other things? Are you familiar with what I'm saying? Like the medical consensus right now is that seed oils are totally healthy, 100% healthy. You're familiar with that?
100%.
Right. Now they banned, when did they ban trans fats? Like trans fats were bad. Was it 2017 or maybe earlier when they banned it?
Yeah, I want to say maybe a decade and a half.
Right. And they didn't ban it outright, right? I think if you have like half of a gram, it's still considered 0.
Right. It's very difficult actually to completely eliminate trans fats from.
Right. So I had these 15 studies and there's this guy on TikTok or Twitter, X, I'll call it X. And he said he's a big proponent of seed oils. And I said, I got 15 studies, prove me wrong. And he went through each of those studies and he showed how the study wasn't valid or it wasn't done correctly. And so he basically left me with no argument that seed oils cause damage to the human body. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to acknowledge that I don't have a good study that shows that seed oils cause harm to the human body. You with me on this?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Now, nobody's tested seed oils with MVX. And that's one of my ideas because MVX measures physiology, right? It's not measuring like the other things like heart disease or risk factors. It's measuring physiology. So if we had a bunch of people consuming, let's say 4 tablespoons a day of seed oils for a month, right? And you do MVX before and after and you see what happens with your score. Don't change anything else with your diet or exercise or lifestyle. That'd be a really good experiment. I think, here's my conclusion. I think seed oils are bad for the human body. I have no scientific evidence to prove that, but there is new scientific ways to study this. In the meantime, I'm not going to consume seed oils. I'm not going to buy it. I'm still going to consume lots of saturated fat because of my bacon and my burgers and stuff like that. I feel really good on saturated fat. I think it's the healthiest fat out there. Mm-hmm. And where do you find seed oils? You don't find that in your burger. You only find it with junk food. So if you're eating seed oils, it means you're eating junk food. So stop it.
Which is where I'd be devil's advocate on their behalf, is that if I'm them, I'm saying the association of seed oils to bad outcomes in epidemiology is probably because it's in the junk food. To be fair,
okay,
I would say also true with saturated fat. Right.
Yeah.
So back to junk food. If junk foods, got half dozen ones, 6 the other. Yeah. I'm inclined towards the dose makes the poison. I will say that getting to the ages stuff, right? Advanced glycation end products, all sorts of forms for which you oxidize the lipids, which is just easier to do with double bonded fatty acids. So polyunsaturated fatty acids, they're easier to oxidize before entering your body, right? So the food you're ingesting already has that. That can be a problem in that it's increasing, the load of reactive oxygen species, for example, right? That ultimately makes its way into circulation. Again, I think it's also a dose makes the poison on the level of oxidation. But that said, all of that said, I agree that it's hard to make a value proposition in either direction. The case that's constantly made for why seed oils are beneficial is if in place of saturated fat, you end up with lower LDL. The thing I find to be interesting in a hypothesis of my own is that I think a higher proportion of LDL particles are removed from circulation, at least in part, if there's a greater degree of oxidative capability. So ox-LDL gets removed from by scavenger receptors at a faster rate than would be LDL particles that remain in circulation that do not get oxidized, right? So you quite literally have an active component of removal that becomes more relevant. Now, again, if you're standard lipid hypothesis based, you're saying that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Even if it's scavenger receptors that are removing it, it's the concentration gradient level of the LDL particles that's harmful. Because if it's not removed by a scavenger receptor, it's going to penetrate the endothelium and start the whole cascade. Right.
Yeah.
In either scenario, though, I still don't know that you can make a value proposition very easily. We can't really know. How much seed oils increase inflammation independently is actually less interesting to me, and I'll explain why. Inflammation, I'm like a proponent. Let me put it this way: I'm a defender of inflammation. Inflammation is crucial.
It's part of the healing process. It's step one in the healing process.
Exactly. We would die without inflammation.
Right.
Thank goodness for inflammation.
We have to get through step 1 to step 2, 3, and 4 to finish the healing cycle.
Exactly.
But if somebody's stuck in step 1, that's a problem with inflammation. Instead of squashing inflammation, you want to heal the body and get them through to step 2.
Yeah, it's two things. Chronic inflammation is a problem. But wait.
But what's causing it?
Why do you have chronic inflammation? Right?
Run MVX, it'll tell you.
Right. My first instinct is not to try to induce anti-inflammatory measures.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah. Which the ketogenic diet is.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic anti-inflammatory measure.
Depending on the root cause of the inflammation.
Exactly. It's all about root cause. So cardiology is saying LDL is bad. LDL is bad. Well, LDL is bad if you're on a junk food diet. LDL is fine if you're a lean mass hyperresponder, or if you have cancer, or if you have an infection. You want high LDL with cancer and with an infection. So that's the U-shaped curve, right, of LDL.
I'll be a good scientist and say I don't know. I know that me getting into my stump speech on LDL, I know that we always seem to look at the concentration gradient. That's why I call the present day lipid hypothesis just concentration gradient based, right? Higher concentration, worse outcome. We find that association in populations that have a cluster of other things that do both a change of the lipid profile and independently increase atherosclerosis. Because of that, it's hard for us to disentangle them from how much there really is a direct relationship between the LDL particles and the outcome of atherosclerosis.
Makes sense.
So we needed to get to this point where we had this category of people that emerged that were like, here's the greatest scientific opportunity.
Right.
We got the signal all by itself without the cluster. We don't have these other things that are independently increasing, both that don't independently change the lipid profile and increase atherosclerosis independently. Okay. So with that said, how then can we see it? That's what the study's for, right? I don't know if you've been keeping up.
Oh, yeah.
We did the recent release. So now all 4 analyses are out. including the pre-registered endpoint.
I'm not cut up with all that, but yeah, I got the basis. Yeah.
But is there any association in even the clearly problematic one? Is there any association we have with LDL or ApoB and atherosclerosis, a concentration gradient? Currently, there's none. Not even a little bit.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, so far, right? Okay, so then that brings it back to the thing that you were just now saying, which is high LDL, high ApoB bad for lean mass hyperresponders? So far, we do not find an association between the outcome. And I want to be a good scientist and say, well, hey, let's even wait until the 5-year data. But so far, we don't see an association. Do we find it can be bad for those people who have existing chronic disease in those clusters? Maybe. The issue is that if the actions you're taking affect those independent markers, those clusters, that have both an effect on the lipid profile and on the independent association of cardiovascular disease. How do we know?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's frustrating because I can both say that and at the same time acknowledge that it is part of the causal pathway of atherosclerosis. ApoB-containing lipoproteins, I believe, are part of the causal pathway of atherosclerosis. It just doesn't tell me enough. Because it's like one of my favorite analogies, it's like car tires and car accidents. Car tires are part of the causal pathway of car accidents.
Right.
Do they drive, pardon the pun, do they drive independently car accidents?
Right.
Do car tires drive car accidents?
Right.
Yes and no, but mostly no. You've got
it gets us back to complex chronic illness. Heart disease is a complex chronic illness, and cardiology loves to talk about LDL. It's very simpleton. It's sort of embarrassing, I think, when you just have a cardiologist talking about LDL and nothing else.
And that's where I get on my soapbox.
Right.
You can totally believe in the lipid hypothesis. You absolutely can say, hey, I believe the concentration gradient of LDL and ApoB will independently increase cardiovascular disease. Okay, hold that thought. Now let's bring in things like insulin resistance syndrome. Hold that thought. Let's just concede that. Yeah. And let's look at what the hazard ratios are by comparison. Right? Just look at that.
It's 10 for diabetes.
Yeah. Don't stop at the LDL. Even if that's your favorite thing to focus on.
Right.
At least acknowledge how much there's a cardiovascular disease risk specifically with insulin resistance syndrome aside from LDL. That's my complaint. My complaint is that LDL, it sucks out all the oxygen in the room, such that I have family members who believe they're at a low risk for cardiovascular disease from only looking at their LDL being low. And because their doctor reaffirms that, they say, yeah, I'm not actually worried about you dying of a heart attack, even when they have fasting insulin at 22.
Yeah.
Right?
So I have a patient, he got a stent put in a year ago, and his LDL cholesterol has been normal for 25 years that I know of. But he's got fast plaquing on his teeth, which is it's an organism.
Yeah.
Organisms release biofilm, which turns to stone. And this mechanism in the teeth occurs in the arteries. And so that's caused by an infection. And like I mentioned before, the American Heart Association talk about infections and toxins. So there's been multiple studies showing, I'll give you examples, like cardiomyopathy on autopsy on a bunch of bodies compared to normal normal people, normal heart autopsies. 22,000 times more mercury in some of these cardiomyopathies. And then lead, tin, arsenic, cadmium, 12,000 times, 15,000 times, 9,000 times more heavy metals in the heart. So I also want to talk about how I think plaquing occurs. And I could be wrong, and maybe this is true for some people, but not others. You can have biofilm from organisms, so this chemical soup, and you add in some minerals and some collagen fibers and some dead tissue, it becomes this soup. It's like when you have a bucket of water and you pour sawdust on the water, it collects together. Like there's electromagnetic forces that keep that sawdust together. And sometimes it'll get stuck to the edge of the bucket, but it doesn't disperse and it doesn't go into the water. So this can happen in the body. And this is how bone spurs are formed, gallstones, kidney stones, and it's called heterotopic ossification. And there's another term too. But you have this mucus stuff with enzymes and minerals, not enzymes, but fibers. And then it becomes a soft plaque, and then it becomes a hard plaque. So LDL is part of that. Macrophages is part of that.
Right.
Organisms, viruses, bacteria, that's all part of it. It's just a big soup. And it's just like any other, when your body is repairing itself, I mentioned the 4 steps of repair. Calcification is part of repair. So you break your bone, the bone calcifies. That's normal. You can have scar tissue that can be like this. It's not calcification, but it's like fibrous tissue, right? So damage to the body is repaired, and the end result can be a calcified plaque or a fibroid or something. And if it happens in the heart, it's called soft or hard plaque. And if you go to a cardiologist, they blame LDL. But there's all these other factors. So how do you get rid of the extra organisms infecting the body? If you have toenail fungus, let's say you have 5 infections: toenail fungus, H. pylori in the stomach, and you have a rash on your skin. That's another infection. Sinus infections. There's 4 infections right there I just mentioned. Those don't get addressed when you go to a medical doctor. They'll give you Benadryl, but they won't fix a sinus infection. There's other examples like that. But you have 4 infections. You've increased your chance of a heart attack because you have those 4 infections. Somebody who has sepsis, their chance of heart attacks goes way up. So you got to clean up all the infections, run MVX, see if your glycate is normal. It should be 300 or less. And then the toxins I just mentioned, run the small cell particle count. It should be 19 or higher. So again, I'm just going back to MVX plus because it's answering all these, it puts together all the things. When I learned about lactic acidosis in 2016, I was like, this is the crux of all chronic disease. This is the basis, the foundation. This makes everything makes sense. I like to solve puzzles. When the Rubik's Cube came out, I got that solved when I was a kid. I ordered a pamphlet, like a booklet on how to solve Rubik's Cube. I can still solve it. It takes me 6 minutes, right? But
have you seen how some of the TikToks where people are like juggling it and solving it while they're juggling?
Yeah, they solve it in like 5 seconds or whatever.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So lactic, the causes, the mechanism, and then feeding the organs to get rid of symptoms. That's what they said in the 1930s, and it's true now with MVX plus. And it just, everything makes sense. Like I feel like I have total mastery on this. And then execution, that's another thing. So because I only work with diet and supplements, there's some cases that I don't fully get. And I got friends that are holistic medical doctors. They'll do like IV ozone, and they'll do like EBU, which is ozone and red light therapy for the blood and stuff like that. So there's my 2 cents on that.
It's a wide world, right? So without question, there's just a lot of people I've gotten a chance to talk to, and it's always exciting because I feel like there's a number of fascinating pieces to the puzzle that everyone can be bringing forward. Some are going to turn out to be solid and land everywhere. Some aren't. I'll concede my default is that I'm not inclined to think there's sort of one thing that it solves all the problems. Let me put it that way, right? But is there something that could hit a bunch all at the same time? Yeah, I'm very interested in learning more on the B1 side.
Yeah. So in my 7-step blueprint to optimal health, B1 is in step 2. Step 1 is diet. Step 3 is drainage, liver, kidney cleaning, lymphatic system cleaning. Step 4 is cleaning the gut. Step 5 is getting rid of organisms from head to toe. Step 6 is detox. Step 7 is cleaning out the cells, like Lyme, Candida, mold can be in the cells. There's my 7 steps. So it covers all the things that are in MVX.
How do you verify each of these steps having been completed?
Symptoms, I do the biofeedback muscle testing. We do labs. I'm using MVX. I run MVX on people like every 6 to 8 weeks. Make sure we're on the right track. Like, yeah. So.
And do you,
yeah.
do you want to like list out what your blood panel typically is?
Well, my blood panel?
Like
no, the functional.
Yeah.
Like
what?
detoxing mold, detoxing parasites, the OAT test, mitochondrial function. I use total tox burden for mycotoxins, chemicals, and metals. So, and I don't use a wide variety of tests. I use big tests that are $500, $600, and they measure the toxins, right? Like a bunch of toxins or a bunch of organisms, and then the mitochondrial function. Those are my favorite tests right there. There's 3. And then the MVX, so cheap, run it frequently, and it gives us a 30,000 foot view on all that put together. So having said all that, it's all, so my focus has been on physiology, right? Fixing the physiology of the cells, like get them working better, get the mitochondria working better. Now there's also the genetics. And at the seminar I was at a few weeks ago, there's a company, Intellex DNA, and they do a swab, buccal swab, and they get the DNA from the patient. And then with their algorithm, it'll show you the most important genetic SNPs and deletions and mutations, and then the therapies to fix it. So before that, we had like 23andMe, which is sketchy, and you had to do your, third-party interpretations and stuff like that. So there are other factors, right? And then people, I don't do hormones. I don't do peptides. Peptides are amazing. Of course, people love being on hormones. But the question is, does it fix your MVX? Yes or no? Does it help make you live longer? Yes or no? It can provide a lot of comfort. I know hormones provide a lot of comfort. So it's not invalid to do hormones. I just don't get into them, right? I'm fixing physiology. And when you do that, your hormones get better. So when I had mold and the radon and the gas leak, my sex hormone binding globulin was crazy high. And then now it's normal, right? And so my lipoprotein A has been high for 10 years. Now I'm on niacin, now it's normal. So you can find these, these things.
So in that sense, you feel like you're dealing more with the root cause, which is why everything downstream of it, including, sex hormone binding globulin, for example,
right,
would change.
Yeah, hormones are tertiary. You have a toxin or organism or malnutrition causing organ dysfunction. Now the organs aren't releasing hormones, or they can't use hormones. So it's like a third on the line. Yeah.
Do you have an opinion on hormone replacement therapy?
I do. I send people out for that if they ask for it. And I like bioidentical hormones.
About like how many patients do you think as a proportion are on hormone replacement?
On my patients?
Yeah.
Male and female, probably 15, 20%.
And I realize it's kind of a newer, but it's becoming more and more common, right?
Yeah.
Particularly for older patients.
Yeah.
Do you find that they feel better?
Yeah, it's a valid therapy. But I'm always asking why. Why are your hormones off? We can't ignore if you have mold. If you're living in a moldy house, you can't ignore that, because that will kill you. Having lower high progesterone or estrogen or testosterone, that's not going to kill you, in my opinion. The mold is trying to literally kill you. Like it killed the tree, and now the tree is on the ground in the forest and there's mushrooms growing on it. I was going to die because of mold. And then the gas leak will kill you. There's things. When I had the gas leak, I had these symptoms, heart disease symptoms. What's one of the top recommendations for heart disease symptoms? Go exercise, right? I would go to the gym. I love going to the gym, park in the parking lot, sit in the parking lot for 30 minutes trying to breathe. And I couldn't, so I'd drive home. What's the point of exercising when you can't breathe and when you have a gas leak? There are things that are way more important than exercise, right? And the longevity doctors talk about you need a lot of muscle mass, you need to be able to exercise to live longer. I don't think that's true at all. My grandmother died at 98. She didn't exercise. When she was 60, she couldn't do a push-up or a pull-up, I don't think. Like, you can have a clean body. It's more important to have no toxins, no parasites, no bacteria in your body, no pathogenic bacteria. And it's more important to have that than to have lower LDL. And that's been shown in this report from February 2023 about MVX. They show how LDL cholesterol is a U-shaped curve risk factor, But when you correct for nutrition or malnutrition, now it becomes a legitimate curve, like a straight line, right? Because nutrition is more important than LDL. And so what is this nutrition thing that they adjusted for? It's the branched chain amino acids. Are you eating enough protein? Can you digest the protein? So when you can do both of those things, then LDL becomes a non-factor. Mm-hmm. And they got the graphics for all that stuff.
Yeah, again, I wouldn't find this surprising, because what is the thing that's impacting your lipid profile? Because so many things affect your lipid profile.
Yeah, exactly. And so you know about LDL being an opsonin. Do you know about that term?
Opsonin?
So, opsonin. So that means it's part of the immune system. So when you go back to the ancient Latin or Greek origin of the word, it means one who prepares a meal for another. So it's like a chef. So LDL cholesterol is an opsonin for certain bacteria or small parasites, like microscopic parasites. So it prepares those organisms to be consumed by white blood cells. So if you have an infection and your LDL goes up, great. That's awesome. Now, some people have an infection, it's causing plaquing in their arteries. Their LDL is up to try to fix the infection. And so you get, you lower your LDL. Does that speed up, the infection process? Like you got to just go deeper. I want medicine needs to go deeper, get smarter, learn more stuff. There's more stuff going on with the human body than what you're looking at, and use MVX Plus. That'll tell you the secrets.
Well, it is anathema to discuss, but there is already a lot of studies that connect ApoB lipoproteins to the immune response.
Exactly.
Including the innate immune response. That I mentioned earlier that there's already data on how they attach to pathogens, how they carry alpha tocopherol and other ferols and trenols, which are commonly referred to as vitamin E, but they're the antioxidants. And it's often described, by the way, that that's like an antioxidant defense for the particle itself. But they protrude from the monolayer of the lipoprotein such that if they come into any reactive oxygen species that are in the serum, that are in the bloodstream, they turn both into a non-reactive product. So a case can definitely be made that, no, it's part of the host defense. It's part of the antioxidant host defense, literally a direct component.
Right.
But there's another structural one that I don't get a chance to talk about too much, but that I'm very interested in for this exact reason, which is macrophages. So monocytes differentiating into macrophages. They're starting in the lumen. When they get inside, they become macrophages. They have to grow to 5 times their size. How do they grow to 5 times their size? Where does that come from? Well, they're like any other bilayer cell. Any other nucleated cell, it's got a bilayer of phospholipids and free cholesterol. And I believe that they get a lot of that structure directly from endocytosing ApoB-containing lipoproteins, because that's a lot of what they're doing.
Oh.
These cells that are sites of inflammation express more LDL receptors, and there's more transcytosis, literally an active process the cell is engaging in to intentionally take ApoB lipoproteins from the lumen and put them into the subintimal space. They're transcytosing them through the cell.
Yeah, why are they doing that?
Good question.
So are we going to talk about...
Why are inflamed endothelial cells... See, this is the thing that I think...
Steve Hussey.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm having him on, by the way.
Okay, good. Point. So is that where you're going with this?
Well,
because I think
it's at a minimum, everyone has to just at least stop for a second. And at the point where the EAS in their 2020 paper, you and everybody else and me know about their 2017 paper, which is low density lipoproteins cause atherosclerosis, right? That's the most famous paper. They had a mechanism paper, which was meant to be part 2 of part 1. The mechanism paper acknowledges transcytosis is the primary way by which ApoB-containing lipoproteins end up in the subintimal space. That was a major turning point for the field of lipidology. For John Q. Public, they didn't catch this. But you'll now find people like Thomas Dayspring will say that, oh, it's actually transcytosis. Engineer Dave is going, hey, I was talking about this. before the 2020 paper, you can look at I kept saying transcytosis needs to be understood for how it directly connects to atherosclerosis. And I thought at that time that, now they need to reassess, at least to some degree, how much of this is a planned process. When it was passive, which never made sense to me mechanistically,
Right.
passive through a healthy endothelium. Through an unhealthy endothelium, you've got porousness that comes from sites of inflammation because endothelial cells separate from each other. But a planned process, a process by which inflamed endothelial cells are themselves expressing receptors that have been transcribed in the nucleus, that are bringing them into vesicles, that were part of the plan, along with the chaperone proteins going from one side to the other, expending ATP all along the way. That's a playbook that the cell is ordering up, right? They're bringing the ApoB lipoproteins at expense through the whole cell to the other side. Why? Well, if it's a planned process, you should care about the why, because it sounds like it's part of this larger plan.
Do you know the why?
Well, I have my own hypothesis.
What's that?
My own hypothesis is this is part of the innate immune response. When you look at the innate immune response, so you've got two versions, right? The innate and the adaptive. What's the innate? The innate is, I call, generally a dog pile. It's generally throw everything at it. Macrophages, when they get in there, their macro is big, phage is eat. They're there to get it all, right? So they're looking and grabbing all kinds of debris and are trying to get it into that big, glob of lysosomes, which are stomachs of acid, to just bring in and disintegrate at will. Now, these ApoB lipoproteins are much smaller than them when they're brought in. But as I just mentioned, I think that there's a structural component. I think part of how the macrophage grows and becomes fully formed as an M1 macrophage is that it is in fact ingesting, it's endocytosing those ApoB lipoproteins into all of these lysosome stomachs, and they're incorporating those phospholipids and free cholesterol into its lipid bilayer so that it can get.
So you're saying the ApoB is part of the immune system, or it's eating up the ApoB because it's dangerous?
No, I'm saying I already know it's part of the immune response from existing literature.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different components. The structural one I'm mentioning right now, I've not been able to find before, but it's the only thing that makes logical sense to me, is how does a monocyte become 5 times bigger? Well, at these molecular levels, they don't just stretch.
Yeah.
They have to take on more phospholipids and free cholesterol. Now, either it's already packed into the monocyte as it stands, but that.
So you're telling me this mechanism, but the why though?
The fully formed M1 macrophage at a site of inflammation, its job is to start hitting foreign things, right?
What are the foreign things?
Okay, before we get to the foreign things, how does it get to where it can get the foreign things?
The transcytosis.
No. Sorry. Let's separate two things.
Okay.
There's two things in play. One is the macrophage gets into the subintimal space and now needs to expand. Thing one.
Okay.
Thing two, how do ApoB lipoproteins get into the subintimal space at a higher rate than they did before? Because inflamed endothelial cells, per the 2020 paper that acknowledges it, have greater greater transcytosis. Transcytosis is through the cell. Endocytosis is into the cell to ingest.
Okay.
The macrophage is doing endocytosis. The endothelial cells are doing transcytosis. So they're getting the ApoB lipoproteins to the endothelial space. They cannot transcytose a macrophage or a monocyte first. It has to come through between the junction gaps. So boom, boom. This, I believe, is absorbing a certain number of non-modified LDL particles to grow large enough and mature so that it can be the amoeba-like macrophage that it is. Then it starts to get the pathogens. Pathogens being whatever is the disease-based foreign objects. Now, things like infection, totally agree. But it doesn't even need to be infection. It could even be an endothelial cell that became necrotic, for example, right? It has to get anything that's not part of its planned infrastructure, period. Now, here's the thing that's always bothered me. It's always bothered me about the story of atherosclerosis, which is macrophages eat cholesterol particles, whatever version they're in, and then stay there.
Right.
Why do they stay there and die? And then more of them aggregate around and then they stay there. Why is there's this?
That'd be the fourth phase of water, or exclusion zone water.
Well, no. The fourth phase of water is in the lumen. So I'm going to have to try to illustrate this here. Here's the
I gotcha.
Here's the endothelial cells. Yeah. Fourth phase water is up here in the lumen. Down here's the subintimal space.
Yeah.
In the subintimal space, right? We've got two issues, which is if there is a breach up here, that needs to hit the clotting cascade. That breach needs to be covered, which brings in all kinds of things like fibrin. It brings in LP(a), right? That has to be covered.
Yeah.
But then this problem that's in the subintimal space has to be taken care of, right? And macrophages, you don't need to do that much research before you find that those guys are on the move. But they're on the move in a secure space. So that breach has to have been covered in order for them to be able to move, but also move and control where they're going. But if they can control where they're going, things are fine. They pick up what they need to and move along. And then ultimately, they're recycled just like everything else. Macrophages shouldn't stop. They shouldn't stop and die. Why they're stopping and dying is an important part of the story we have to understand. But what's never made sense to me, and I don't know why I'm being so emphatic, even though it's my own podcast, but I just find I have to keep revisiting this. And the engineer in me is like, why did the vehicle stop and die? It's not good enough for you to tell me that it just did, that it was some conserved thing it's a dysfunction in this highly advanced biological machine that I'm looking at. No, you need more. That makes it make more sense. And if you're telling me it's the concentration gradient and it's by random chance, that's going to be a tough sell to me, because then it should be all throughout the vasculature, right? And it's not. It's in areas of greater mechanical stress, right? Where there's greater hemodynamic, issues, which makes sense to me from the immune response standpoint. That's why often, one of my favorite analogies is roofers, right? If you can imagine what it's like here in Vegas. You see what the weather's like outside. If I had to do some roofing up there, it wouldn't be a problem. But if I went to the Florida Keys during a Category 3 hurricane, it'd be pretty tough to do some shingling there. And I might just be like, screw it, I need to just get out the duct tape and the plastic, and I'd cover the hole that way, right? Mm-hmm. That to me is I think, an example of calcification. The immune system is constantly making these tough decisions in its response. And if you've got vascular damage, I think that if it's moderate, then it's like typical hemostasis. It can get fixed. It can get taken care of. And I'll bet that the vast majority of it is in a healthy human. But in places where there's a lot more shear stress, it's just tougher. It's tougher because the pressure's much higher. Makes it harder for the area that's damaged to get stabilized. And therefore, there's just tougher decisions the immune response needs to make. And so getting back to that area that I've just now described, macrophages are doing the best that they can to deal with the pathogens or the damage itself that could be down there, right? But if you already have persistent high blood pressure, like that already was a high blood pressure area, like the LAD, that's already a high blood pressure area.
Yeah.
On top of that, you have confirmation. It's a heart, right? It's not a static thing. It's already on top of the shear stress. It's already doing this, right? And then on top of that, you throw in a bad diet. You throw in an ultra marathoner who's like on their, 90th mile and they've got a vascular tear, right? You have to understand that your immune cells needed good conditions to get the best work done. And so, yes, when we bring that back to things like deficiencies, oh man, we don't have all the enzymes we needed to make to deal. Maybe we don't even have all the enzymes we need in the lysosomes
or even the
macrophages.
Yeah, or the vitamin C to keep that artery.
Yeah, or the
tight.
vitamin D to get enough of the transcription done,
Right.
right? So, of course, in my mind, things like cardiovascular disease are complex diseases. But I say this often, I think the list of ways to get vascular damage is actually pretty long.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of ways to get it, but I think the way to repair it is a tiny list. It's short. You want the most awesome immune response when it's time that you can get. And the problem is you can't feel it. You can't feel a vascular tear. You can feel an MI,
Yeah.
but that's at the point that you have, an actual clot that has, or plaque that's broken off and you're having to deal with things like ischemia. That's a long time after, or even a short time after, depending on how bad it happened or how fast it happened. So going all the way back to the immune response, I believe LDL particles are absolute part of the immune response. I believe that they are a part of those foam cells that are being generated. But those foam cells, how much of those were meant to stabilize an area to ultimately clear it out, we're finding out in real time. I think you can reduce the likelihood that you have an event from an MI by going absolutely crazy and reducing your ApoB lipoproteins as much as you can. But that's why I bring up all-cause mortality, because how much of a trade-off is there at what point?
Sure.
And I don't know the answer to that.
Let me throw this out. I mean, theoretically, you can reduce fibrin all the way down and then prevent.
Exactly. Yes.
Exactly.
Perfect example. Right. We talk about ApoB and macrophages. Are macrophages part of foam cells? Yep. They're probably I think I'm correct on this. I think they're a bigger part of foam cells than cholesterol is. Actually, I'm not even sure if this is theoretical. I think there actually are studies on this. If you reduce monocytes, would you end up with less atherosclerosis? I think they've done this in animal models. I'll have to double check myself on this. But could I posit the theory that if you could reduce the production of M1 macrophages, would you end up with less atherosclerosis? I totally bet my car on that one, right? Okay. Therefore, hey, let's reduce macrophages, right?
Right.
No, of course we wouldn't even dream of that because we already know they're an essential part of the immune response. Even though I just now got done telling you that they're part of foam cells too, right? It's just that cholesterol holds this kind of special place in medicine
because they have drugs for it. You're thinking very holistically. This is very dangerous. It's
so
really
that's
good.
Why we needed to study lean mass hyperresponders. We needed to find some people who are powered by fat. This is our hypothesis. They're powered by fat. That's why their LDL is high. Hey, but their LDL is not high because of some pathogenic entanglement. Now, do we find this association between their LDL, their ApoB, and atherosclerosis? So far, no. Not even a little bit. Not even close.
Interesting.
I'll probably turn this into a segment. It's actually, this may be the most kind of unhinged I went, but
it's good.
Okay, you know what? What the hell? I'll take this Band-Aid off too. I'm now past this point where we have all 4 analyses. I'm trying to get the recruitment for the 5-year. But I'm aware that I need to be very mindful of the way that I speak because I have research partners that are board certified lipidologists that certainly believe in the lipid hypothesis in a form. And I'm doing my best to be a good scientist because this is true. If you were to say, would you bet everything you own in perpetuity from now until the end of time that the lipid hypothesis is wrong and that it'll never apply to lean mass hyperresponders? being a good scientist, I cannot say that I believe that I could say yes to that, right? I can't say that. Do I feel as though I'm accumulating more and more data myself personally, spearheading this study that seems to be pushing back so far on the lipid hypothesis applying to lean mass hyperresponders, given what I just told you? So far, yeah. If the scale is tipping, it is. It seems to be supporting more and more of what it was that I was already thinking. But it's not at a point where I feel such certainty I stop. I want to get that 5-year data, and I have this other study I want to do. I think one study is not enough. No, we need to have more studies. But it's frustrating that I can't always feel the level of comfort that I should to even state it the way that I did just now. Like, I'm not pouring out a level of 100% confidence. I'm not giving bumper sticker science and saying, listen, guys, you're fine if you're a lean mass hyperresponder. No, it's a heterogeneous group. Some people have rapid plaque progression, and I don't know exactly what steps they need to take, but that doesn't mean that they're at low risk just because they have that profile. However, we have lean mass hyperresponders with verified regression. Regression. In spite of having high LDL and high ApoB, they have lower plaque in their second scan than they did in their first.
Because of the keto diet?
Who knows why? Okay. We just know that they have high LDL and high ApoB, and in spite of that, the plaque is lower.
Amazing.
That's amazing data.
Yeah.
And it should get talked about. It is exciting.
Yeah. Well, those thoughts you had earlier about the holistic viewpoint it's mind-blowing. It's really good thoughts.
I from the moment I was learning about that space, because I need to think about things in 3D space.
Yeah.
I have to.
Right.
I need it. Okay, here's a good example. Fun fact. How much of your blood, your total, like if I took out all 5 liters, you're an adult male, probably 5 liters of blood. If I pulled it out, how much as a total proportion of your blood are taken up by LDL particles?
1%?
Less.
Okay.
It's
0.5%?
Less.
Okay.
It's about 1,000th. Yeah.
Of a percent?
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Okay.
Now, I'm going to match that with a number you won't believe. What are they measured in? They're measured in quintillions. That's a million trillions. It's a 1 with 18 zeros after it, right?
You're talking about the size of it? What are you talking about?
I'm talking the number.
The quantity. Oh, yeah. Gosh. Okay.
Try to imagine a number that's a 1 with 18 zeros after it.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. It's because they're 22.5 nanometers in diameter.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're so small that if you figure out what their total spatial composition is, because of how small they are, in spite of what their huge number is, it's still a tiny amount of the bloodstream. But their precursor, VLDL, can be much larger with more triglycerides on board, and chylomicrons are gigantic compared to them. You can have a lot of chylomicrons in the blood that once they're centrifuged, they make that foam. You can see it in the blood, but you're not seeing LDL particles. There's not enough of them, unless you get to preposterous levels. I'm not even sure if it works if you get to preposterous levels. I think you can only see triglyceride-rich lipoproteins because of how big they can be, right? But when I was learning about this, that's why I had to understand this in 3D space. Already there was a problem for me because I'm going, wait. The mass against an endothelial cell, which is gigantic by comparison, and they're not even striking it head on, right? Like they're flowing alongside it, even in places of bifurcation as it's coming through. Because of their mass, they're mostly going out this way. If you look at a stream, right? Like look at bubbles in a stream. They might be alongside the sides of it, but they're not just naturally smashing into anything. So I always had a problem with this explanation that they're smashing through endothelial cells.
Right.
That never made sense to me. They're smashing through the bilayer, somehow making their way through the the cytosol through the cytoskeletons and all the organelles without turning them into Swiss cheese, and still have enough force to smash through the bilayer on the other side, never made sense to me. And that's why when the transcytosis story came up, I was like, finally, okay, yeah, now that's the way. That's how it can make sense. But again, I'm coming from a place that mechanistically, now we need to have that more uncomfortable conversation. If it's a planned process, if it's planned, that sounds a lot more like the immune response, which is kind of what I would expect. In the same place where it's inflamed and it's becoming porous, that's the one other way, which is if it's inflamed and it's becoming porous, they're small enough that they could get through the junction gaps there. But if that was enough, why would inflamed endothelial cells still increase LDL receptors for the transcytosis?
Yeah.
It's an important question that should stop everyone in their tracks.
Right. I mean, if you solve that, it'll give us a lot of answers for really intelligent solutions. Yeah.
All right, we should probably wrap. Did you have anything else you wanted to add in for the end of the podcast?
Subject-wise, no. No, you got me thinking. I mean, we covered a lot of territory. I wanted to really talk about MVX, and I did. We talked about the holistic viewpoint, which
Lactic
is great.
acidosis.
We talked a lot about diet and supplements, or nutrition. So it's all good.
How can people find you?
How can people find me?
Yeah.
Let me look at my... I texted my IT guy. There's several ways to find me. I already mentioned mvxtraining.com for doctors to learn how to read and use MVX as a guide and a measurement. For other people, not doctors, I have two resources. One is theholistichealthacademy.com. So with that, I have a 7-step blueprint optimal health course, and there's community chat, and we have like 1,800 recipes. So if you're on a certain diet, like Whole30 diet, dessert, or carnivore diet, breakfast, you can search those tags, the hashtags, get these recipes. So that's just launched. Both those just launched the last couple months. Otherwise, my main office website is the nhcaa.com, which is the Nutritional Healing Center, Ann Arbor. And so if you want to be a patient, then you can contact us through that and call our office on the phone. And so we see patients locally, and people fly in. We see patients through telehealth from a distance. And I got my book on Amazon Kindle. It's called Optimal Health. So I have a lot of resources. I got courses, e-courses, and e-books, and those are on my website. So there's a lot going on there. It's just been 10 years of figuring stuff out and then making a course on a different subject. And then I got my YouTube channel. And then with MVX Plus coming out, it's like it validates everything. So I can just input MVX as your before and after measurement, and validation that you're doing the right lifestyle, validation that the supplements are working. And so my confidence with my clinical expertise has like skyrocketed. So if you want to be a patient, you can contact my office. Otherwise, and I have a B1 ebook. It's on my website front page. So go up to the top, click on courses. It's the first thing. It says Vitamin B1 ebook. And I charge $4.99 for that. But that's like a summary. It's the most important, ebook that I've written. And it gives you a start. So if somebody just wants to like put their toe in the water a little bit and start somewhere, that's where you start with that ebook on B1.
Well, thanks for coming on, Darren.
Dave, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, well worth it. A lot of fun. Just kind of blew my mind at the end there a little bit with that discussion. Thanks for having me.